A corrupt cop mocked him in court until he showed his FBI credentials, Part 1. You move real slow for somebody who's about to have a very bad night. The flashlight hit his face like a slap. White beam, full force, aimed at the eyes, the kind of angle designed to blind and disorient, not to identify. Behind it, the outline of a uniformed officer filled the driver's side window, one hand on the mag light, the other resting on his duty belt with the casual confidence of a man who had done this 100 times before and never once been questioned. The sedan's engine was still running. The radio played low, a Memphis FM station cycling through late-night jazz. The clock on the dashboard read 9:47 p.m. The neighborhood was quiet. Kerr Avenue, South Memphis, a block of single-story houses with chain-link fences and porch lights left on by people who had learned that darkness invited attention. A second beam joined the first from the passenger side. 2 officers, 2 flashlights. The man behind the wheel sat perfectly still, both hands placed flat on the steering wheel at 10 and 2, fingers spread, visible. He did not speak, did not move, did not reach for the glove compartment or his pocket, or anything that could be interpreted as a threat by men who had already decided what they were looking at. License and registration. The voice from the driver's side carried no question mark. It was an order delivered in the particular tone of authority that expected compliance the way gravity expected objects to fall. And keep those hands where I can see them. The man nodded once, moved his right hand slowly, exaggeratedly slowly, toward the sun visor, where a folded registration slip was clipped, every motion telegraphed, every gesture calculated to eliminate ambiguity. He had done this before, too. The officer snatched the documents before they were fully extended, studied them under the flashlight with the kind of attention that suggested he was looking for problems rather than information. Isaiah Beckett. He said the name like he was testing whether it was real. This your current address? Yes, sir. 2 words, nothing more. Where you coming from tonight, Isaiah? The grocery store on Lamar. Grocery store. The officer repeated it the way people repeat things they do not believe. He leaned closer. The flashlight dipped enough for Isaiah to see the man's face. Square jaw, cropped blonde hair, a neck that suggested he spent more time in the gym than behind a desk. The nameplate above his right breast pocket read, Coulter. 3 chevrons on the sleeve. Sergeant. A sergeant running a routine traffic stop on a Tuesday night. That was the first thing that did not add up. Sergeant supervised. They did not pull over 10-year-old Camrys on residential streets unless they had a reason, or wanted to create one. The dispatch log would later show no record of a traffic violation, no bolo match, no reported suspicious activity on Kerr Avenue that evening. Sergeant Wade Coulter had initiated the stop based on what his supplemental report would describe as the vehicle operating with a non-functioning rear license plate light. The plate light was functioning. It had been inspected and documented 14 days earlier. But Isaiah Beckett did not say any of that. He sat with his hands on the wheel and waited for whatever came next, the way a man waits who understands that surviving the present moment matters more than winning the argument inside it. The sergeant who had just threatened him had no idea that every word he spoke was being recorded by a device sewn into the lining of Isaiah's jacket, a device with a federal evidence chain of custody number and a Department of Justice authorization stamp dated 14 months ago. And he had no idea that the man he was about to search, humiliate, and eventually arrest was the reason his entire precinct was already under investigation. If this satisfying tale of satisfying justice has your attention, tap the subscribe button and turn on notifications. You will not want to miss what happens next. 6 weeks earlier, Isaiah Beckett had pulled into the driveway of 1412 Kerr Avenue in a U-Haul truck with Virginia plates and a 10-year-old Toyota Camry hitched behind it. The house was a 2-bedroom rental, brick exterior, sagging porch, a yard that needed attention, and a roof that needed prayer. The landlord, a retired postal worker named Glenn Overby, had rented it sight unseen after a phone call and a wire transfer for first, last, and deposit. Isaiah had chosen the house for 3 reasons. First, It sat inside the patrol zone of Memphis Police Precinct South, the target of a Department of Justice pattern or practice investigation that had been running for 14 months under authorization of 34 U.S.C. Section 12601. Second, Kerr Avenue was 2 blocks from the intersection where the highest concentration of pretextual stops had been documented in the DOJ's preliminary data, 73 stops in 18 months, 70 of which involved black drivers, 61 of which produced no citation or arrest. Third, the house had a detached garage with a locking door, which meant he could charge the recording equipment without neighbors asking questions about hardware that had no business being in a freelance IT consultant's home. The cover identity was simple by design. Isaiah Beckett, age 41, originally from Norfolk, Virginia, bachelor's degree in information technology from Old Dominion University. Self-employed as a cybersecurity consultant. Contract work, mostly remote, flexible schedule. Recently relocated to Memphis for lower cost of living after a divorce that existed only in the backstopping paperwork the Bureau had filed with the credit agencies 6 months earlier. No criminal record, no warrants, no flags in any system that a patrol officer could access. He was, on paper, the most boring man on Kerr Avenue. In reality, Isaiah Beckett was a special agent with the FBI's Civil Rights Division, 12 years in the Bureau, 3 undercover assignments completed, 2 commendations, 1 reprimand for insubordination that he maintained was justified, and his supervisor maintained was not. He had been selected for the Memphis operation because he fit the profile the Bureau needed. A black man who could pass as unremarkable in a neighborhood where unremarkable black men were stopped and searched at rates that had triggered federal attention. His first week on Kerr Avenue passed without incident. He unloaded furniture, second-hand couch, kitchen table, a desk for the spare bedroom that would become his office. He waved at neighbors. He drove to the hardware store for porch repair supplies. He established the rhythms of a man settling into a new life. Morning coffee on the porch, afternoon laptop work visible through the front window, evening walks to the corner store for groceries. He did not need but purchased anyway because the routine made him visible, and visibility was the point. The notebook appeared on day 3. A small leather-bound journal, brown unlined, the kind sold at office supply stores for $6. Isaiah carried it in his back pocket the way some men carried wallets, reflexively, unconsciously, as though it were an extension of his hand. When he walked the neighborhood, he wrote in it. When he sat on the porch, he wrote in it. When he returned from the corner store, he sat in his car for 2 minutes before going inside and wrote in it. To the neighbors, this was a quirk. The new guy on Kerr Avenue liked to write things down. Maybe he kept a journal. Maybe he was working on a book. People in Memphis did not ask too many questions about what other people did with their time, especially people who had just arrived and might just as easily leave. To Isaiah, the notebook was evidence collection. Every entry dated, timed, and initialed. Every observation logged with the precision of a man who had been trained to build cases that would survive cross-examination. License plate numbers of patrol cars that circled the block. Badge numbers visible from 30 feet through wire-rimmed glasses that were prescription, but also served as cover for the kind of focused observation that might otherwise seem suspicious. Timestamps of stops he witnessed from his porch. Other drivers pulled over, questioned, searched, released, rarely cited, never told why. The pattern was clear within the first week. Precinct South ran its patrol zone the way a toll booth operator runs a highway, extracting compliance from everyone who passed through, with particular attention to those who could not afford to push back. On day 9, Isaiah met his neighbor. Doreen Kincaid was 72 years old, 5'0", and possessed the kind of direct eye contact that suggested she had spent 7 decades refusing to be ignored. She appeared at his fence line on a Saturday morning carrying a plate of cornbread and a facial expression that communicated hospitality and interrogation in equal measure. "You the one who moved into Glenn's place?" Not a question. Isaiah accepted the plate. "Yes, ma'am. Isaiah Beckett." "Doreen, I'm next door. The one with the magnolia." She nodded toward her yard, where a magnolia tree large enough to shade both properties dominated the landscape. "You work?" IT consulting, mostly from home. She studied him the way she probably studied the weather, looking for signs of trouble. You planning to stay? That's the plan. Good. Last tenant stayed 3 months. Police ran him off. Not officially. They just made it unpleasant enough that he decided Memphis wasn't worth it. She paused. Let that settle. You'll meet Sergeant Coulter soon enough. He likes to welcome the new people. She said, welcome the way a doctor says discomfort, as a professional euphemism for something considerably worse. Isaiah filed the name, Coulter. He already had it in his case files. 17 formal complaints in 6 years, none sustained, all closed with the notation, insufficient evidence to support allegation. The man was prolific, persistent, and protected. I appreciate the cornbread, Ms. Kincaid. Doreen, and eat it while it's warm. She turned back toward her yard, then stopped. You write things down a lot. I see you with that notebook. Old habit. Habits are either useful or they're trouble. Figure out which one yours is before somebody else does. She disappeared behind the magnolia. The screen door on her porch banged shut with the authority of a period at the end of a sentence. Isaiah stood on his porch holding a plate of cornbread and a warning wrapped in neighborly advice. He opened the notebook, wrote the date, the time, and Doreen's exact words about the previous tenant. Then he went inside, set the plate on the kitchen table, and pulled up the DOJ's preliminary report on his encrypted laptop. 17 complaints against Coulter, all closed. But the complaints told a story that the closures tried to bury. A pattern of pretextual stops, warrantless searches, property damage during vehicle inspections, verbal harassment during booking, and one allegation of excessive force that had been reclassified as officer-involved de-escalation technique by the Internal Affairs Review Board. The IA Review Board at Precinct South consisted of 3 officers. One of them was Captain Boyd Sheridan, Coulter's direct supervisor. Another was Lieutenant Frank Gentry, the precinct's report-writing specialist. The third rotated quarterly, but had never included an officer from outside the precinct or a civilian representative. The Foxes reviewing the henhouse, the oldest pattern in American policing, and exactly the kind of structural failure the DOJ investigation was designed to document. Isaiah ate the cornbread. It was excellent. Then he went back to the porch with his notebook and waited for Sergeant Coulter to welcome him to the neighborhood. He did not have to wait long. The first stop came on day 11. Isaiah was driving home from a client meeting, a real meeting, with a real local business that needed a network security audit arranged by the Bureau's cover team to give his consulting identity verifiable depth. It was 4:22 p.m. Daylight, light traffic on South 3rd Street. He was doing 31 in a 35 zone. His seatbelt was fastened. Both headlights and taillights were operational. He had verified them that morning, as he did every morning, because driving while black in a patrol zone under federal investigation required the kind of vehicle maintenance that bordered on obsessive. The blue lights appeared in his rearview mirror 3 blocks from home. No siren, just lights, the silent kind of stop that gave the officer discretion about how official to make the encounter. Isaiah pulled to the curb, hands on the wheel, engine running, radio off. The officer who approached was not Coulter. It was a woman, young, late 20s, dark hair pulled back, athletic build. Her nameplate read, Hale, badge number 2294. She walked with the careful alertness of someone who had been told to expect trouble and was determined to find it. Good afternoon. License and registration, please. Professional tone. Textbook approach. But her eyes moved through the car's interior with a speed that suggested she was looking for something specific rather than conducting a general assessment. Isaiah provided the documents. May I ask why I was stopped, officer? Your registration sticker appeared expired from a distance. She studied his license, then the registration. The sticker was current, valid through March of the following year, clearly visible on the rear plate. She had already seen it during her approach. She was holding the documents to extend the encounter. Where are you coming from today? A client meeting downtown. What kind of work? IT consulting. IT. And she said it the way Coulter would later say grocery store, with that particular inflection that transformed a neutral word into an expression of doubt. You work from home mostly? Mostly. Lot of equipment for that kind of work? Computers, servers, that sort of thing? The question was a fishing expedition. Computer equipment could justify further inquiry. Was it stolen? Was it used for illegal purposes? Did it warrant a look in the trunk? Isaiah recognized the technique. It was listed in the DOJ's preliminary report as Pattern 4B, conversational pretext development through occupation-related questioning. A laptop and a router. Standard stuff. He kept his answers short. Cooperative, but uninformative. The verbal equivalent of keeping your hands visible. Hale returned his documents. The sticker's fine. Must have been the angle. Have a good evening. 7 minutes. No citation. No warning. No legitimate basis for the stop documented in any system Isaiah could access through his bureau credentials later that night. Just a data point. Another tally mark in the column of stops that existed for no reason except the driver's appearance in the wrong neighborhood at the wrong time while wearing the wrong skin. He drove the remaining 3 blocks home, parked in the driveway, sat in the car for 90 seconds, opened the notebook, wrote the date, time, location, duration, officer name, badge number, stated reason, and actual reason. Then he added a line at the bottom that he underlined twice. Hale asked about computer equipment, unprompted, specific, prescripted. The second stop came 4 days later, same stretch of road, same time of day, different officer. This time a male, older, paunchy, nameplate reading Swift, badge number 1871. The stated reason was a lane change without signaling. Isaiah had signaled. The turn signal was functional and had been captured on Doreen Kincaid's porch camera, which faced the street and recorded 24 hours a day, because Doreen trusted the Memphis Police Department about as far as she could throw the magnolia tree in her yard. Officer Swift conducted the stop with a boredom that suggested routine. Asked the same questions Hale had asked. Where are you coming from? What do you do for work? How long have you lived here? Same fishing expedition, same lack of citation. Same 7 to 9 minute window that maximized inconvenience without crossing into the legal territory of an unreasonable detention under Terry v. Ohio. Isaiah documented it, added it to the file, noticed the pattern that was already emerging. The stops were staggered. Different officers, different pretexts, same target. Someone was coordinating. Someone was assigning his vehicle, his address, his description to patrol officers with instructions to make contact and develop pretexts. The third stop was different. It came at night, 9:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. And this time, the officer was Sergeant Wade Coulter. This was the stop that opened the story. The one with 2 flashlights and a threat delivered in the particular tone of a man who believed that darkness and authority combined to create a space where rules bent in his direction. Coulter held Isaiah's license for 4 minutes, walked back to his patrol car, ran the plates, clean, ran the license, clean, ran Isaiah's name through every database available on the mobile terminal, clean. Then he walked back to the driver's window with the expression of a man who had expected to find something and was annoyed that reality had failed to cooperate with his assumptions. Step out of the vehicle. The words landed in the quiet night like a stone dropped into still water. Isaiah did not move immediately. He had rights. He knew them better than the man invoking authority to override them, but he also knew that rights were theoretical until they survived the space between an officer's command and a citizen's compliance, and that space, on a dark street in South Memphis, was measured in seconds that could go wrong faster than any court could later correct. He stepped out, slowly, hands visible. The second officer, Hale again, this time positioned at the passenger side, watched with her hand near her holster. Not on it, near it. The distinction mattered legally, but not practically. Hands on the roof. Coulter positioned himself behind Isaiah, close enough that his breath was audible. "Spread your feet." A pat-down. No consent requested. No reasonable, articulable suspicion stated. Just the physical assertion of authority over a body that had committed no crime, violated no law, and threatened no one. Coulter's hands moved across Isaiah's torso, down his sides, along his legs. Professional in technique, invasive in context, the kind of search that existed in a legal gray zone wide enough for a sergeant to drive a patrol car through. His hand stopped at the back pocket. The notebook. "What's this?" Coulter pulled it out, held it under the flashlight. "A notebook." "I can see that." He flipped through pages. Isaiah watched from the corner of his eye. Hands still on the roof, feet still spread, the posture of compliance that his body maintained, while his mind cataloged every procedural violation occurring in real time. "You write down a lot of things, Isaiah. License plates, badge numbers, times and dates." Coulter's voice shifted, slower, the tone of a man who had found something unexpected and was deciding whether it was a threat. "You keeping tabs on my officers?" "I keep a journal." "This doesn't look like a journal. This looks like surveillance notes." He snapped the notebook shut, held it at his side rather than returning it. "You some kind of reporter? Activist? One of those cop watch people?" "I'm an IT consultant. The notes are personal." "Personal." Coulter turned the word over like he was inspecting it for cracks. Then he did something that would matter later, when the federal case file grew thick enough to require its own evidence locker. He dropped the notebook on the ground. Not accidentally. Not in the course of a legitimate search procedure. He held it at waist height and opened his fingers, letting it fall onto the asphalt with a sound that was small but deliberate, the kind of sound that said, "I can do this and you cannot stop me." Pages fanned open against the pavement. 14 months of documented observations, time-stamped and initialed, lying in the gutter of a Memphis street while a sergeant with 17 unsustained complaints stood over them with a flashlight. Isaiah did not react, did not raise his voice, did not clench his fists, or step toward the notebook, or do any of the things that his nervous system urged and his training overrode. He stood with his hands on the roof of his car and looked straight ahead at the brick wall of Doreen Kincaid's house, where a porch camera he had helped her angle 3 days ago was recording everything in 1200-pixel clarity. "Pick it up," Coulter said, "when I'm done." He finished the search. Found nothing, because there was nothing to find. The recording device was sewn into the jacket's lining in a location that a standard pat-down would not detect, designed by the Bureau's Technical Services Division for exactly this kind of encounter. The encrypted phone in his pocket was commercially available and indistinguishable from a civilian device. His wallet contained his cover identity documents and nothing else. "You're free to go." Coulter stepped back. For now. Isaiah bent down and picked up the notebook. The spine was cracked. 2 pages had torn loose. He gathered them without expression, placed them back inside the cover, and slid the notebook into his pocket. Then he got into his car, started the engine, and drove the remaining half-block to his driveway. In the rear-view mirror, he watched Coulter and Hale standing under the streetlight, watching him park. They did not leave for another 3 minutes, making sure he knew they were watching, making sure the message landed. Inside the house, Isaiah locked the front door, walked to the spare bedroom, and plugged the recording device into the Bureau's secure upload terminal. The file transferred in 47 seconds. Time-stamped. Geotagged. Chain of custody documented automatically by software that had been running federal investigations since before Coulter earned his first stripe. He opened the notebook to the torn pages, smoothed them flat on the desk. The handwriting was his, precise, small, the lettering of a man who had learned early that clear documentation was the difference between a case that held and a case that collapsed. He picked up a pen and added one final line to the evening's entry. Coulter took and dropped notebook. Intimidation. Pattern consistent with complaint numbers 7, 11, and 14 in DOJ preliminary file. Recommend accelerating field documentation timeline. Then he opened his laptop, logged into the encrypted portal, and filed his nightly report to the Civil Rights Division field office in Oxford, Mississippi. The report was 2 pages, clinical, specific. The language of federal investigation stripped of emotion, focused entirely on facts that would survive a grand jury's scrutiny. He did not mention that his hands had trembled when he picked up the notebook. He did not mention the metallic taste in his mouth that adrenaline left behind like a signature. He did not mention that for 11 seconds, standing on a dark street with a sergeant's breath on his neck and a flashlight in his eyes, he had felt the particular helplessness that no amount of training or credentials or federal authority could fully insulate a black man from, when the badge and the gun belonged to someone who had already decided what you were. Those 11 seconds were not evidence, they were experience. And experience, in the DOJ's filing system, did not have a case number. But Isaiah remembered them, wrote them in a different notebook, the one he kept in the bedside drawer, the one without dates or badge numbers or legal citations, the one that was just for him. The private record of what it cost to do this work, the toll that no commendation or court victory would ever fully repay. He closed both notebooks, made coffee, did not sleep until 2 a.m., woke at 5:30, checked the upload confirmation, reviewed the camera footage from Doreen's porch. The quality was excellent, Coulter's face clearly visible, the notebook drop captured from an angle that showed intent rather than accident. Day 15 in Memphis. 3 stops, 0 citations, 1 damaged notebook, 1 sergeant who did not know that every move he made was building a federal case against him. And the real trouble had not even started yet. The 4th stop came 6 days later, but it was not a stop. It was a visit. Isaiah was on his porch at 7:15 a.m., drinking coffee, watching the street wake up. A patrol car rolled past. Slow, deliberate. The automotive equivalent of eye contact held too long. It reached the end of the block, made a U-turn, and came back, parked directly across from his house. Engine running, windows down. The officer inside, Hale, lifted a coffee cup in his direction. A greeting that was not a greeting, a reminder that the street belonged to whoever wore the badge. She sat there for 45 minutes, did not exit the vehicle, did not approach, did not do anything that constituted a law enforcement action, just parked and watched. The message was atmospheric rather than verbal. We see you, we know where you live, and we have nothing better to do than make sure you know it. Isaiah drank his coffee, wrote in his notebook. When Hale finally pulled away at 8 a.m., he noted the duration and the fact that no other houses on the block had received similar attention. The visits became routine. Every 2 or 3 days, a patrol car would park within visual range of 1412 Kerr Avenue and remain for 30 to 60 minutes. Different officers, different times. The same effect, a low-grade surveillance presence that communicated institutional interest in a man who had done nothing to earn it except exist in a space that the precinct had decided to monitor. By the end of week 3, the social escalation began. Isaiah noticed it first at the corner store. The owner, a Lebanese man named Fadi, who had been friendly during Isaiah's first visits, asking about the neighborhood, recommending the best shawarma in South Memphis, began avoiding eye contact. Transactions that had included small talk now concluded in silence. The change was abrupt enough to have a cause. The cause arrived 2 days later in the form of Doreen Kincaid, standing at the fence line with no cornbread and an expression that had traded hospitality for warning. Police came to talk to Fadi. Her voice was low, pitched for the space between their yards and no further. 2 of them, the big sergeant and a woman, told him you were under investigation. Didn't say for what. Just left it hanging so his imagination could do the rest. When was this? Tuesday morning. Right after he opened. Made sure the other customers heard. That's how it works around here. They don't have to prove anything. They just have to say the word investigation near your name and the neighborhood does the rest. She paused. Fadi's not a bad man. He's a scared man. There's a difference, but the result's the same. Isaiah thanked her. She shook her head, not accepting thanks, dismissing it as inadequate for the situation. I've lived on this street for 31 years. I've seen them do this to 4 people. 5 now, counting you. The last one sold his car, broke his lease, and moved to Jackson. That's what they want. They want you to leave. And if you don't leave, they make staying so expensive that leaving looks like your idea. She fixed him with a look that was equal parts sympathy and assessment. So the question is, are you going to leave? No, ma'am. Then you better have a plan, because they definitely have one. She went back to her magnolia. The screen door closed. The conversation was over. Isaiah stood at the fence for a full minute after she left. Then he went inside, opened his encrypted laptop, and drafted a supplemental report to the field office. Witness intimidation of local business owner. Officers identified as Coulter and Hale. Purpose: social isolation of investigation subject, consistent with Pattern 6A in preliminary DOJ data. Community pressure campaigns targeting individuals who resist initial compliance. He filed the report. Then, he went to the corner store, bought a bag of rice he did not need, and said good morning to Fadi, who did not say it back. The professional Escalation arrived the following week, wearing a sport coat and carrying a clipboard. Glenn Overby, the landlord, appeared at Isaiah's door on a Wednesday afternoon with the particular expression of a man who had been visited by authority and found it unpleasant. He was 67 years old, retired USPS, and had the posture of someone who had spent 40 years delivering mail in all weather and had developed a permanent forward lean from decades of loaded satchels. Need to do an inspection, Glenn said. He did not make eye contact. Lease allows it with 24 hours notice. I'm giving you notice now. I'll be back tomorrow at 10. Everything all right, Mr. Overby? Everything's fine, just routine. He turned to leave, then stopped on the porch steps. Something in his posture shifted, the lean becoming more pronounced, as if the weight he was carrying was not physical. Look, I got a call, from the police. They said you might be involved in something. They didn't say what. They suggested I might want to reconsider the lease arrangement. Did they give a name? Didn't have to. I know who calls from that precinct. Same man who called about the last tenant. Glenn finally looked at him. His eyes held the particular exhaustion of a man caught between conscience and convenience. I'm not evicting you. The lease is the lease. But I want you to know that they called. And I want you to know that I don't like being in the middle of whatever this is. He left. Isaiah watched his truck pull away, then went to the spare bedroom and logged the contact. Landlord intimidation. Another pattern in the DOJ's data. Pattern 8C. Economic pressure applied through property owners and employers to destabilize residency of targeted individuals. The inspection happened the next day. Glenn walked through the house with his clipboard, checking appliances and plumbing with the thoroughness of a man who needed the visit to look legitimate. He found nothing wrong because nothing was wrong. Isaiah kept the house immaculate, not from personal fastidiousness, but from operational discipline. An undercover agent's residence could not invite scrutiny, every surface clean, every item in its place, every piece of equipment that might raise questions locked in the detached garage behind a door that required a key Isaiah kept on his person at all times. Glenn signed the inspection form, handed Isaiah a copy, and left without small talk. The professional relationship had been poisoned, not destroyed. Glenn was too principled for that, but contaminated by the knowledge that maintaining the lease meant maintaining a position between a tenant and a police department that had made its preferences clear. Week 4. The escalation shifted from social and professional to something more direct. The 5th stop was different from the first 4. It happened in broad daylight, at 2:15 p.m. on a Saturday, on Kerr Avenue itself, not on a main road where the encounter might be attributed to traffic enforcement, but in front of Isaiah's own house, where the message was unmistakable. Isaiah was unloading groceries from his trunk. 2 bags. Paper, not plastic. The store on Lamar still used paper. He had 1 bag in each hand when the patrol car pulled up and Coulter stepped out. No lights. No pretense of a traffic stop. Just a sergeant getting out of his car in the middle of the afternoon and walking toward a man holding groceries. Isaiah. first name. The forced familiarity of authority asserting intimacy it had not earned. Need to talk to you for a minute. I'm listening. Isaiah set the bags on the trunk, kept his hands visible. The reflex was automatic now. 3 weeks of conditioning had trained his body to signal compliance before his mind could consider resistance. We've been getting complaints about your property. Coulter stood with his thumbs hooked in his belt, the posture of a man who owned the space he occupied. Noise, suspicious vehicles, people coming and going at odd hours. I haven't had any visitors since I moved in. No one has come to this house except my landlord. That's not what the complaints say. I'd like to see the complaints. Coulter's jaw tightened. The request was reasonable and he knew it. Formal complaints were public record. A citizen had the right to know who had complained and about what. But the complaints did not exist. They were a pretext, a conversational tool designed to create the impression of community concern where none existed. They're being processed, he said. Paperwork. I understand. When they're available, I'd appreciate copies. Isaiah reached for his grocery bags. If there's nothing else, there is something else. Coulter stepped closer. Close enough that Isaiah could see the sun reflected in his aviator sunglasses, could read the embroidery on his tactical vest, could smell the particular combination of aftershave and authority that the sergeant wore like a second uniform. I've been patient with you, Isaiah. I've been professional. But I want you to understand something. He leaned in. The space between them narrowed to inches. This is my neighborhood. These are my streets, my officers, my patrol zone, and people who cause problems in my zone don't last. They don't get run off. They just find that Memphis has a way of making itself uncomfortable for people who don't fit. You understand what I'm saying? Isaiah met his eyes. Behind the aviators he could see the calculation. The assessment of whether intimidation was landing, whether the target was softening, whether this particular application of pressure was achieving its designed effect. I understand you, Sergeant. Isaiah picked up the grocery bags. I'm going to take these inside now. He turned his back on Coulter and walked toward his front door. The act was deliberate. Turning your back on a man who expected you to face him was a small assertion of autonomy that registered as defiance in the language of power. Coulter watched him go. Isaiah could feel the stare between his shoulder blades like a physical weight. Inside the house, he set the groceries on the counter and stood in the kitchen for 2 minutes, breathing. Then he wrote the encounter in the notebook. Every word, every gesture. The distance between their bodies measured in approximate inches. The exact phrasing of the threat, because it was a threat, however carefully it had been wrapped in the plausible deniability of, I'm just being honest with you. The recording device had captured everything. The upload would go out that evening. But Isaiah added something to this entry that he had not added to previous ones. A single word circled 3 times in the margin. Accelerating. The pattern was not just continuing. It was intensifying. Moving from surveillance to social isolation to professional pressure to direct confrontation. Following a trajectory that Isaiah had documented in 9 other precincts during his bureau career. A trajectory that ended, eventually, in one of 2 places. The target left, or the target was arrested. And since Isaiah was not leaving, the arrest was coming. He could feel it the way a sailor feels a storm building beyond the horizon. Not visible yet, but present in the pressure, the wind, the way the atmosphere shifted before the sky did. The only question was the pretext, what they would use. What they would plant or fabricate or reinterpret to transform a man with no criminal record into a man in handcuffs. He did not have to wonder long. If you're following along with this story, go ahead and hit the like button. Every click helps others find this journey toward justice. The 6th encounter was physical. It happened on a Thursday evening, 6:22 p.m., in the parking lot of the grocery store on Lamar Avenue. Isaiah was walking to his car with a bag of groceries when Coulter's patrol car pulled into the lot and parked diagonally across 2 spaces, the kind of parking that communicated urgency or entitlement, depending on whether you believed the badge justified it. Coulter and a second officer, not Hale this time, but a stocky man with a shaved head whose nameplate read Briggs, approached on foot, fast, purposeful, the body language of men who had already decided what this encounter would be before it began. Isaiah Beckett. Coulter's voice was louder than the situation required, loud enough for the parking lot to hear, loud enough for the woman loading her trunk 3 spaces over to stop and watch. We've received a report of a vehicle matching yours involved in a hit-and-run on Winchester Road. Need to inspect your vehicle. When did this allegedly occur? Isaiah set the grocery bag on the ground, hands visible, voice level. About an hour ago. I've been inside the store for the past 40 minutes. The security cameras will confirm that. We'll check the cameras, but first, the vehicle. Coulter circled the Camry, examining the body panels with the flashlight from his belt. The car was pristine. No dents, no scrapes, no paint transfer, no damage of any kind. He knew this. He had looked at this car during every previous stop and knew its condition the way a hunter knows the terrain of a favorite ground. Briggs positioned himself at the rear of the vehicle. Between them, Isaiah was boxed. Coulter at the driver's side, Briggs at the trunk, the store wall behind him. The geometry was not accidental. Open the trunk. Coulter straightened up. We need to check for evidence of the collision. The vehicle has no damage. There was no collision. I'm not consenting to a search. The words hung in the air. They were legally correct. Without probable cause or consent, the trunk search was impermissible under the Fourth Amendment. But legal correctness and practical reality occupied different territories in a parking lot on Lamar Avenue with 2 officers and no witnesses willing to stay and watch. Coulter's expression did not change. I wasn't asking. He stepped toward Isaiah, into his space, chest to chest, close enough that their shirts nearly touched. His right hand came up and pressed flat against Isaiah's sternum. Not a strike, not a shove, a placement. The heel of his palm against Isaiah's chest, fingers spread, the physical punctuation of a sentence he had not yet finished speaking. Step, back, from, the vehicle. Each word delivered with a slight increase in pressure. Isaiah felt his weight shift backward, not voluntarily, but from the mechanical force of a larger man's hand against his center of gravity. His shoulders touched the car behind him. He was pinned. Coulter's hand on his chest, the Camry's trunk at his back, Briggs watching from 5 feet away with his body cam running. Isaiah did not raise his hands, did not push back, did not create any movement that could be reinterpreted later as resistance or aggression. He stood pressed against his own car by a sergeant's palm and said 3 words. I'm not resisting. The words were for the body cam, for the recording device, for the eventual courtroom where this moment would be replayed in slow motion by attorneys who would parse every syllable for evidence of intent. He said them clearly, at a volume calibrated to reach every microphone within range, and he said them without emotion because emotion could be recharacterized as hostility by officers trained in the art of narrative construction. Coulter held the pressure for 6 seconds. Then he released it, stepped back. His face showed nothing, no anger, no satisfaction, no recognition that he had just committed a battery that would be documented in a federal case file before midnight. Vehicle's clean, he said to Briggs. No damage consistent with a collision. He looked at Isaiah. Must have been a different car. Our mistake. Have a good evening. They walked back to the patrol car. Pulled out of the lot. The woman 3 spaces over had already driven away. The parking lot was empty except for Isaiah, his groceries on the ground, and the fading sound of a patrol car engine. He stood still for 30 seconds. Then he picked up the bag, put it in the car, sat behind the wheel, and gripped the steering column until his knuckles ached. The tremor in his hands was not fear. It was the physiological aftereffect of a confrontation that his body had processed as danger and his training had forced him to endure without the natural response of fight or flight. He drove home, uploaded the recording, filed the report, added the incident to the case file under the heading Use of Force, Non-Striking Physical Contact, Chest Press. He described the pressure, the duration, the body positioning, the verbal commands. He noted that Briggs's body cam had been running and that the footage should be preserved through a litigation hold if it had not already been lost, corrupted, or reclassified. The three most common fates of body cam footage in precincts under investigation. Then he called his handler. Special Agent Nadine Okafor picked up on the second ring. She was the Bureau's case agent for the Memphis investigation, a 15-year veteran of Civil Rights Division investigations who had overseen pattern or practice cases in Cleveland, Baltimore, and Ferguson. Her voice carried the specific calm of someone who had heard everything and was surprised by nothing. "How bad?" she asked. "Chest press in a parking lot. 2 officers. Fabricated pretext of a hit and run that never happened." Isaiah kept his voice clinical. "Report mode. The personal processing would happen later, in the hours between filing and sleep that he filled with coffee and silence. He's escalating. The timeline's compressing. Are you safe to continue?" "I'm safe, but the next step is an arrest. They're building toward it. Social isolation, landlord pressure, repeated stops, now physical contact. The pattern is textbook. They'll need a pretext, probably a consent search where something appears that wasn't there before, or a witness who reports activity that didn't happen." Okafor was quiet for a moment. "If they arrest you, the cover holds. We've backstopped everything through the Memphis field office. They'll book you undercover identity, and we'll have a public defender make contact within 6 hours. You do not reveal credentials. You do not identify yourself as Bureau. Not until we're ready." "Understood." "Isaiah." Her voice shifted, from case agent to colleague, from protocol to something closer to concern. "The evidence is strong. 14 months of documentation. We don't need you to be a martyr. If it gets too dangerous, we pull you out and file with what we have. What we have is enough for a consent decree. What we need is enough for criminal referrals. Individual officers, not just institutional patterns. That means I stay." He paused. "The chest press tonight. That's 18 U.S.C. Section 242. Deprivation of rights under color of law. If we can document one more incident with sufficient force to establish willfulness, Coulter's looking at federal charges, not just administrative discipline." "I know the statute, Isaiah." "Then you know I have to stay." Another silence, the kind that existed between people who understood each other well enough to disagree without needing to argue. "Stay," she said. "But check in every 12 hours instead of 24, and move the backup extraction plan to ready status. If they arrest you and the cover starts to slip, I need to have people in position within 2 hours." He agreed. They ended the call. Isaiah sat in the dark kitchen of a rented house on a street where his name was already being spoken in tones that ranged from curiosity to suspicion, to the particular silence that precedes a community turning its back on someone it has decided not to protect. And he waited for the arrest that he knew was coming, the way a chess player knows the opponent's strategy, not because the moves were surprising, but because the board had been arranged to make them inevitable. The arrest came 11 days later. It was a Wednesday, 10:14 p.m. Isaiah was driving home from a legitimate client meeting, network audit for a dental practice in Midtown, paperwork signed, invoice submitted, the kind of mundane professional activity that anchored his cover in verifiable routine. He turned onto Kerr Avenue from South 3rd Street. The headlights swept across the familiar landscape of chain-link fences and porch lights. Blue lights. Behind him. 2 cars this time. One marked, one unmarked. The marked car belonged to Coulter. The unmarked car held Officer Hale and a third officer Isaiah had not encountered before. Male, mid-30s, nervous energy visible in the way his hand rested on his holster during the approach. 3 officers for a traffic stop on a residential street. The arithmetic of overkill. "Evening, Isaiah." Coulter's flashlight was off this time. He did not need it. The streetlight above cast enough illumination to make the encounter feel almost civilized. "Going to need you to step out of the vehicle." "May I ask why?" "We received a tip. Anonymous caller reported suspicious packages being transported in a vehicle matching yours. We need to conduct a search. I don't consent to a search. That's your right. Coulter leaned against the car door, almost casual, almost friendly. But here's the thing. The tip gives us probable cause. Under Tennessee Code Section 40-7-103, we can search a vehicle based on probable cause without consent. So I'm giving you a choice. You can cooperate and open the trunk yourself, or we can open it for you. Either way, we're looking inside. The legal citation was accurate. The probable cause was fabricated. But on a dark street with 3 officers, the distinction was academic. Isaiah stepped out, handed over the keys, stood on the curb with his hands in his pockets. A deliberate choice, casual rather than defensive, the posture of a man who had nothing to hide and wanted his body language to confirm it. Coulter opened the trunk. Hale moved to the passenger side. The 3rd officer stood near Isaiah, not close enough to touch, close enough to react. The choreography was practiced. Coulter at the trunk, Hale creating a sightline that blocked Isaiah's view of the rear quarter panel, the 3rd officer ensuring the target stayed in place. 30 seconds passed. Isaiah heard the trunk contents being shifted: his laptop bag, a box of networking cables from the client meeting, a windbreaker folded on top of the spare tire. Then Coulter's voice, carrying across the night, with the particular satisfaction of a man who has found what he was looking for. "Well, what do we have here?" He emerged from behind the trunk holding a clear plastic bag. Inside the bag, a white crystalline substance. Maybe 2 grams, maybe 3. Small enough to have been concealed under a wheel well lining. Small enough to have been placed there by hands that knew exactly where to put it and when. Isaiah looked at the bag, looked at Coulter, looked at Hale, who had stepped back from the passenger side and was now facing him with an expression that was carefully constructed to show surprise. The kind of surprise that required rehearsal. "That's not mine. Nobody's stuff is ever theirs." Coulter sealed the bag, labeled it with a marker from his vest pocket, and handed it to Hale. "Isaiah Beckett, you're under arrest for possession of a controlled substance. Tennessee Code Section 39-17-418. Turn around and place your hands behind your back." The handcuffs closed with 2 clicks, tight, tighter than necessary, the metal biting into wrist bones with a pressure that was technically within policy and practically punitive. The 3rd officer gripped Isaiah's arm above the elbow and guided him toward the patrol car. The guidance was firm, fingers digging into the muscle, the kind of grip that left bruises in shapes that matched fingertips. "You're making a mistake," Isaiah said. Not for Coulter. For the recording device. For the body cam on the 3rd officer's chest. For every microphone capturing this moment in a chain of evidence that would eventually reach a federal courtroom. "Only mistake here is yours, friend." Coulter opened the rear door of the patrol car. His hand pressed the top of Isaiah's head, pushing him down into the back seat with more force than the clearance required. Isaiah's forehead struck the door frame. Not hard enough to cut, hard enough to sting, hard enough to constitute unnecessary force during a compliant arrest. "Watch your head," Coulter said, 3 seconds too late. The drive to the precinct took 9 minutes. Isaiah sat in the back seat with his hands cuffed behind him, the plastic seat cold through his shirt, the cage partition filling his forward view with diamond-patterned steel. He counted his breaths, catalogued the route, noted the absence of Miranda warnings, which were not required at this stage, not until custodial interrogation, but their absence confirmed that Coulter was not interested in questioning. He was interested in booking, in processing, in creating a record that would follow Isaiah through the system regardless of whether the charges survived contact with a competent defense attorney. At the precinct, the booking process followed standard procedure with flourishes of humiliation. The pat-down was thorough beyond justification. Every pocket emptied, every seam checked, the notebook confiscated and bagged as evidence, rather than returned as personal property. His phone was seized, his wallet photographed front and back, his belt removed. Standard, but performed with the slowness of ritual. The booking officer, a woman in her 50s whose nameplate read Price, and whose expression communicated the particular weariness of someone who processed human beings through institutional machinery 8 hours a day, fingerprinted him without comment, photographed him from 3 angles, asked the standard questions in the standard order. Do you have any medical conditions? No. Are you currently taking any medications? No. Do you have an attorney you'd like to contact? Isaiah paused. The cover held. The Bureau had prepared a public defender, a cooperating attorney in the Shelby County Public Defender's Office, who had been read into the investigation at a level sufficient to handle initial representation without compromising the case. But the phone call needed to happen. The Bureau needed to know he was in custody. The extraction protocol needed to be ready. I'd like to make my phone call. Phones available after processing. Price stamped a form, handed it to Coulter, and looked at Isaiah with an expression that might have contained sympathy, or might have been the resting face of bureaucratic exhaustion. You'll be in holding until arraignment. Bail hearing set for Friday. Wednesday night to Friday morning. 36 hours in holding for a misdemeanor possession charge, standard in theory. Punitive in practice, long enough to miss work, long enough to create a gap in the cover that would require explanation, long enough for the neighborhood to notice that Isaiah Beckett's car was not in the driveway and his lights were not on, long enough for the message to land. The holding cell was institutional green, concrete bench, steel toilet, fluorescent light that buzzed at a frequency designed to prevent sleep. Isaiah sat with his back against the wall and did what he had been trained to do in environments designed to break composure. He slowed his breathing, lowered his heart rate, and began constructing the timeline he would need when this was over. At 11:41 p.m., he was allowed his phone call. He dialed the number the Bureau had provided, a Memphis area code that routed through a commercial answering service before connecting to Okafor's secure line. The line rang 4 times, then 5. Then 6, then voicemail. He left a message, brief, coded, following protocol. This is Isaiah. I'm at the office and I'll be here through Friday. Please reschedule my Thursday appointments. Translation. Arrested. Held at precinct. Bail hearing Friday. The answering service would transcribe and forward within 30 minutes. Okafor would have the message by midnight. He hung up, walked back to the holding cell. The door closed behind him with the sound that every person who has ever been incarcerated recognizes. The mechanical finality of metal meeting metal, the sound of autonomy being placed in someone else's hands. Isaiah sat on the concrete bench and waited for Friday. The bail hearing convened at 9:15 a.m. on Friday in courtroom 4B of the Shelby County Criminal Court. Judge Lorraine Fitch presided, a woman in her 60s whose reputation for procedural exactitude was matched only by her impatience with attorneys who mistook the courtroom for a stage. Isaiah stood at the defense table in the same clothes he had been wearing when arrested: khaki pants, blue polo, wire-rimmed glasses that needed cleaning but had not been returned to him until 15 minutes before the hearing. His public defender was a man named Marcus Adler, mid-30s, overburdened, carrying 7 case files in addition to Isaiah's, who had been briefly informed of his role by a contact he knew only as a friend at the federal building. Adler did not know Isaiah was FBI. He knew only that this client was important to people who outranked him, and that his job was to secure bail and maintain the cover identity. A DA, Margot Ainsley, represented the state. She stood at the prosecution table with the posture of someone who had done this so many times that the proceedings were less a legal contest than a formality. Her case file was thin: arrest report, evidence log, officer statement. The thinness did not concern her. Bail hearings in drug cases were perfunctory in Shelby County. The presumption of guilt operated as atmospheric pressure, invisible but constant. The state requests bail be set at $15,000. Ainsley's voice carried the flat authority of routine. The defendant is a recent transplant to Memphis with no family ties in the community. His employment is unverified and appears to consist of freelance work with no fixed employer. The nature of the charges, possession of a controlled substance, combined with the defendant's transient residential status, presents a flight risk that warrants significant bail. Adler responded with the standard arguments: no prior record, established residency with a signed lease, ongoing client contracts demonstrating community ties. Judge Fitch listened without expression, made notes, and set bail at $5,000 with conditions: surrender of passport, weekly check-in with pretrial services, no contact with arresting officers. The no contact provision was standard. But for Isaiah, it meant something specific. The court had just ordered him to stay away from the officers he was investigating, an irony that would have been darkly funny if the consequences of the arrest were not already cascading through his cover identity in ways that would take weeks to repair. Bail was posted within 2 hours by the Bureau's cooperating attorney through a bond company that had been pre-arranged for exactly this contingency. Isaiah walked out of the Shelby County Justice Center at 11:20 a.m. on a Friday morning, squinting against sunlight he had not seen in 40 hours, wearing wrinkled clothes and carrying a plastic bag containing his phone, wallet, and belt. The notebook was not in the bag. It had been logged as evidence. His notebook, 14 months of field observations, documented in his handwriting, containing badge numbers and timestamps and pattern descriptions that could be connected to the DOJ investigation by anyone who studied them carefully enough, was now in the evidence room of the precinct that was the target of that investigation. Isaiah stood on the courthouse steps and processed this fact with the particular stillness of a man who has just realized that the board has shifted in ways he did not anticipate. The notebook was written in a personal shorthand that would resist casual interpretation, but Gentry, Lieutenant Frank Gentry, the precinct's paperman, the report-writing specialist whose attention to documentary detail was precisely the skill that made him valuable to Coulter, was not casual. He was meticulous. And if he studied that notebook with the same care he applied to building supplemental reports, the shorthand would eventually yield its meanings. The cover might hold, or it might not. And the difference between those outcomes was measured in the number of days before Gentry opened that evidence bag and started reading. Isaiah flagged a ride on his phone. The app showed a driver 4 minutes away. He used those 4 minutes to call Okafor on a disposable phone the cooperating attorney had provided. "They have my notebook," he said without preamble. Okafor did not waste time on sympathy. "How much of the investigation is in it?" "Field observations only. No case numbers, no agent names, no DOJ references. But the patterns are there. Badge numbers, stop frequency data, complaint cross-references. If someone with investigative experience reads it carefully..." Gentry. Isaiah watched the courthouse door, half expecting to see Coulter emerge with a grin and a follow-up charge. He'll connect the dots, maybe not today, maybe not this week, but soon. And when he does, the question becomes whether he tells Coulter or whether he uses it as leverage. For what? For whatever Gentry wants. He's not like Coulter. He doesn't do this because he enjoys it. He does it because the system rewards it. And a man who works for rewards can be turned if the reward changes. Isaiah paused. But that's a decision above my pay grade. I'll brief the AUSA today. We may need to accelerate the timeline. If the cover's compromised, we file with what we have and bring you in. Okafor's voice carried the weight of a decision being made in real time. Can you hold for 2 more weeks? If they don't read the notebook, yes. If they do... He let the sentence hang. 2 weeks, Isaiah. That's all I'm asking. 2 more weeks of documentation, and we have enough for criminal referrals on Coulter specifically. Everything before this is pattern evidence. Institutional, systemic, the kind the consent decree is designed for. But your personal experience, the stops, the chest press, the planted evidence, the arrest, that's individual criminal conduct. That's 18 U.S.C. Section 242. That's a jury trial and a federal sentence. 2 weeks. He agreed because the math made sense, because 12 years in the Bureau had taught him that the difference between changing a system and changing a headline was measured in evidence, and he was the evidence. The ride arrived. He got in, gave his address. watched Memphis slide past the window, the city going about its Friday business, unaware that a man in wrinkled khakis in the back of a Toyota was carrying a federal investigation in his memory and a fabricated arrest on his record, and that the distance between justice and its absence was exactly 14 days. Curtis Vega's barbershop sat on the corner of Mississippi Boulevard and McLemore Avenue, a single-story brick building with a striped pole that had been spinning since Curtis's father opened the doors in 1978. The shop was an institution. 4 chairs, sports radio playing low, a jar of peppermints on the counter that had been refilled so many times it had become part of the architecture. Isaiah had started going to Curtis for haircuts in week 2, not because he needed them frequently, but because barbershops in black neighborhoods were information exchanges, community bulletin boards where news traveled faster than any digital network. Curtis was 63 years old, deliberate in his movements, and possessed the particular kind of social intelligence that came from spending 40 years listening to people talk while he held sharp instruments near their heads. On the Saturday after the arrest, Isaiah sat in Curtis's chair and told him what had happened. Not the federal investigation, that remained sealed, just the arrest, the planted evidence, the bail hearing, the fact that his notebook had been confiscated and his name was now in the system. Curtis listened without interrupting, finished the edges with the precision of a man who believed that attention to detail was a form of respect. Then he set down the clippers and spoke. Same thing happened to DeWitt Palmer. Lived on Trigg Avenue, 2 blocks over from you. Same sergeant, same routine, stops, searches, then one day they find something in his car that wasn't there before, and he's sitting in county. DeWitt was a teacher. 5th grade, coached basketball at the rec center. Charges got dropped eventually, but the arrest record stayed. School district let him go. Couldn't coach anymore. Last I heard, he was driving a truck for a shipping company in Jackson. Curtis paused. That was 3 years ago. Coulter's still here. DeWitt's not. Did anyone file a complaint? DeWitt's wife did. Went to Internal Affairs. Know what they told her? Insufficient evidence to sustain the allegation. Curtis said the words in the precise tone of someone quoting a document he had memorized through repetition. Same words they use every time. Same words, same result, same nothing. Isaiah sat with this information, added it to the mental file that he maintained alongside the written one, the file of human costs that statistics could not capture. Names, faces, careers ended, lives rerouted. The residual damage of a system that investigated itself and consistently found nothing wrong. I have something, Curtis said. He reached behind the counter and pulled out his phone. The night they arrested you, I was closing up late. My security camera catches part of the street, not much, just the sidewalk and the curb. But I got video of them searching your car. Isaiah went very still. Can I see it? Curtis played the video. The angle was oblique, shot from above, the camera mounted at the barber shop's roofline, pointed at the sidewalk but capturing a slice of Kerr Avenue beyond. The quality was standard consumer grade, grainy in the darkness, but clear enough to show Hale's right hand, gloved, moving toward the wheel well of the Camry, 3 seconds before Coulter called out, "What do we have here?" 3 seconds that told a story the arrest report did not. 3 seconds that showed placement rather than discovery. Curtis, Isaiah's voice was carefully modulated. This is important. I need you to save this video. Keep the original file. Don't delete it from your camera system, and don't tell anyone you have it. Not until I say it's time. Until you say? Curtis gave him a look that held years of experience with promises made by men who eventually left. Why would I wait for you to say? Because timing matters. Isaiah met his eyes. Because showing this to the wrong people at the wrong time means it disappears. And I can't tell you how I know that, but I need you to trust me when I say that this video is worth more than a complaint that gets filed and forgotten. It's worth enough to matter, but only if it shows up at the right moment. Curtis studied him for a long moment. The barbershop was quiet. Saturday afternoon, between appointments, the radio playing low in the background. Two men in a room that smelled like aftershave and machine oil, negotiating a trust that had no contract and no guarantee. "All right," Curtis said. "Curtis, I'll hold it, but I want something in return." "Name it." "When the time comes, whatever you're doing, whoever you really are, you don't leave without finishing it. You don't take the video and disappear and let things go back to the way they were. Because I've seen that too. People come in, stir things up, collect their evidence, and then they're gone. And the people who live here, the DeWitt Palmers, the Doreen Kincaids, they're the ones who deal with the aftermath. I won't leave until it's finished." Curtis held his gaze for 3 more seconds. Then he nodded, put his phone away, picked up the clippers. "You need a lineup on the back. Sit still." 4 days later, the retaliation began. The patrol car appeared outside Curtis's barbershop on a Tuesday morning, 9:15 a.m., opening time. It parked directly in front of the entrance, not at the curb, not across the street, but in the customer parking space closest to the front door. Engine running, officer visible through the windshield, Coulter, alone, coffee in hand, not moving. He stayed for 2 hours and 12 minutes. During those 2 hours, 6 potential customers approached the shop, saw the patrol car, and turned around. Curtis watched from inside, standing behind the chair he had worked from for 4 decades, watching his livelihood drain away one turned head at a time. The car returned the next day. Same time, same space, same officer. This time, Coulter got out and entered the shop. He did not sit in a chair. He stood near the door, thumbs in his belt, and made conversation with the kind of aggressive friendliness that turned small talk into interrogation. "Nice place, Curtis. Family business, right? Your father started it?" He picked up a comb from the counter, examined it, set it down on a different surface. Small disruptions. The rearrangement of another man's space. "Must be tough, running a small business in this neighborhood. Lot of crime around here. Lot of uncertainty." He looked out the window at the street. "I try to keep an eye on things. Make sure the good businesses stay safe, but I can only do so much." Curtis said nothing. He stood behind his chair and watched Coulter touch his tools, move his things, fill his shop with a presence that was designed to communicate ownership rather than service. "You know your neighbor, Isaiah Beckett? The IT guy?" Coulter's tone shifted, casual to pointed. "He was in here recently, getting a haircut. You two talk?" "He's a customer. Customers talk." "Sure they do." Coulter picked up the peppermint jar, tilted it, set it down. "Just wondering if he mentioned anything about his arrest, or about any video he might have, from a security camera, hypothetically." The word hypothetically landed in the room like a dropped knife. "I cut hair," Curtis said. "That's what I do here." Coulter smiled, the smile of a man who had planted a seed and was content to let it grow in whatever direction fear took it. "I'm sure that's true. Well, you have a good day, Curtis. I'll be around." He left, but the patrol car returned the next day, and the next. Each time a few more customers turned away. Each time Curtis's daily revenue dropped a little further. By Friday, the week's income was 52% of normal. The math was simple and merciless. A barbershop that could not attract customers was a barbershop that could not survive. When Isaiah came for his appointment the following Saturday, Curtis's hands were steady on the clippers, but his voice was not. "They're parked outside every morning now. My regulars are going to other shops. I had 2 cancellations yesterday. One of them, Marcus Dean, I've been cutting his hair for 19 years. He called and said his wife didn't want him going anywhere the police were watching." Curtis paused. The clippers hummed. "I'm not a brave man, Isaiah. I'm a barber. I have a mortgage and a shop lease and a daughter in college. I can't afford to be a hero." Isaiah sat in the chair and felt the weight of what his investigation was costing the people who lived inside it. The DOJ's data measured patterns. The consent decree would address policies. But neither would reimburse Curtis Vega for the 19-year customer who stopped coming because a sergeant parked outside his shop to make a point. "Keep the video," Isaiah said quietly. Keep it safe, and start writing down every time they park outside. Date, time, duration. How many customers you lose, how much revenue drops. Write it all down. What good does writing it do? Paper outlasts power, Curtis. It always has. Isaiah paused, weighing how much to reveal against how much trust he was asking for. There are people who are going to want to see those numbers, people with more authority than a precinct sergeant. When the time comes, your records will be the difference between a complaint that gets filed and forgotten and an action that actually changes something. Curtis looked at him in the mirror. Whatever he saw in Isaiah's face, confidence, certainty, the particular calm of a man who knew something he could not say, it was enough. I'll write it down. He picked up the appointment book, turned to a blank page, wrote the date and a number. 6 customers lost, $342 in revenue. But if this doesn't go somewhere, Isaiah, if this is just another round of nothing, I need you to know that nothing has a cost, and the people who pay it aren't the ones making promises. Isaiah nodded. He could not promise outcomes, could not guarantee that the federal investigation would produce the justice that 14 months of documentation demanded. He could only promise that the evidence would be gathered, the case would be filed, and the people who had been harmed would have their experiences recorded in the permanent record of a system that preferred to forget. It was not enough. He knew it was not enough. But it was what he had. If this story is keeping you on the edge of your seat, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And stay tuned, because what comes next changes everything. The pre-trial motion hearing was scheduled for a Thursday, 3 weeks after the arrest. Courtroom 4B again. Judge Fitch again. The machinery of justice grinding forward at the speed of bureaucracy. Calendars checked, motions filed, responses drafted, replies submitted, all of it consuming time and paper, while Isaiah's cover identity accumulated damage with every day that his arrest record remained active. Adler, the public defender, had filed a motion to suppress the evidence. The plastic bag allegedly found in Isaiah's trunk. The legal basis was straightforward. The anonymous tip that provided probable cause for the search was unverifiable and lacked sufficient specificity under Illinois v. Gates to justify a warrantless vehicle search. Tennessee courts applied the totality of the circumstances test, and a call from an unidentified person reporting suspicious packages without describing the packages, identifying the driver, or specifying the type of suspicion did not meet the threshold. Ainsley's response was equally predictable. The tip, combined with officers' prior knowledge of the defendant from previous legitimate encounters, provided sufficient cause. The prior knowledge reference was a legal euphemism for the 5 pretextual stops that had preceded the arrest, each one now recharacterized as evidence of ongoing investigation rather than harassment. The hearing began at 10 a.m. The gallery held a handful of observers, a law student taking notes, a court reporter's intern, and in the back row, Lieutenant Frank Gentry in civilian clothes, sitting with the casual attentiveness of a man who was there by choice, rather than subpoena. Gentry's presence was the first thing Isaiah noticed. The second was what Gentry was holding, a manila folder, unmarked, thick enough to contain multiple documents. Isaiah could not see the contents from the defense table, but the folder's presence in Gentry's hands, rather than in the evidence file or the prosecution's briefcase, suggested it contained something that had not been formally entered into the case record. The notebook. Gentry had read the notebook. Isaiah's posture did not change. His expression did not shift. 12 years of undercover work had trained him to receive alarming information the way a lake receives a stone, absorbing it completely while maintaining a surface that revealed nothing. Ainsley called her first witness, Officer Trina Hale. The direct examination was efficient. Hale described the anonymous tip, the traffic stop, the search, the discovery. Her testimony was rehearsed, but not obviously so. She answered questions in the particular cadence of someone who had memorized a narrative and was careful not to deviate from it. Adler's cross-examination probed the tip's specificity. Where did the tip come from? A phone call to the precinct's non-emergency line. Was it recorded? Yes, All non-emergency calls were logged. Could the caller be identified? No. The caller did not provide a name, and the number was traced to a prepaid phone purchased with cash. Did the caller describe the suspicious packages? No. Did the caller identify the vehicle beyond matching the defendants? The caller described a dark sedan on Kerr Avenue. There are approximately 40 dark sedans on Kerr Avenue on any given evening, Adler said. How did officers determine that my client's vehicle was the one described? The vehicle was the only one in motion on the block at the time of the stop, Hale answered. Was a canine unit requested to verify the presence of controlled substances before the search? No. The tip provided sufficient probable cause. In your opinion, not in mine. Adler returned to the defense table. No further questions. Ainsley called her second witness, Sergeant Wade Coulter. Coulter took the stand with the confidence of a man who had testified in courtrooms more times than he could count and had never once been contradicted by the outcome. He settled into the witness chair, adjusted the microphone, and faced the courtroom with an expression that communicated authority, patience, and the absolute certainty that the system he served would continue to serve him in return. The direct examination covered familiar ground: the tip, the stop, the search, the discovery. Coulter's answers were longer than Hale's, more detailed, more performative. He was telling a story, not reciting facts. And the story he told painted Isaiah Beckett as a suspicious figure, new to the neighborhood, vague about his employment, uncooperative during previous encounters, and in possession of a notebook full of information about police operations that suggested either criminal reconnaissance or some other form of organized opposition to law enforcement. He writes everything down, Coulter said, leaning slightly toward the microphone. Badge numbers, shift times, patrol routes. He's got notes on my officers that look like, well, they look like someone doing homework on us, like he's studying us. He paused, smiled. A small, controlled expression designed for the gallery rather than the judge. I told my partner, be careful around this one. He thinks he's FBI or something. Scattered laughter from the gallery. The law student stopped writing. The court reporter's fingers continued their mechanical rhythm. And in the back row, Frank Gentry opened the manila folder, looked at a page inside it, and then looked at Isaiah. Isaiah did not return the look. He sat at the defense table with his hands folded and his face showing nothing, while a sergeant with 17 unsustained complaints told a courtroom full of people that the man he had arrested was so thorough in his documentation that he almost seemed like a federal agent. The irony was sharp enough to draw blood, and it was about to become the most important moment in the case. But not yet, not today. Today, the motion hearing would conclude, the judge would reserve her ruling, and Isaiah would walk out of the courtroom with the charges still pending and the cover still holding, barely, precariously, like a bridge with too much weight and not enough support. Outside the courtroom, in the hallway where attorneys negotiated and families waited and justice moved at the speed of paperwork, Isaiah passed within 6 feet of Gentry. Their eyes met for less than a second. In that fraction of time, Isaiah read what the manila folder had already told him. Gentry knew. Maybe not everything, maybe not the DOJ or the Bureau or the 14 months of investigation, but he knew that the notebook was more than a journal. He knew that Isaiah Beckett was more than an IT consultant, and he was deciding what to do with that knowledge. The next 2 weeks would be determined by Gentry's decision. Whether he told Coulter, whether he told Sheridan, whether he kept it to himself as insurance, information to be spent when the price was right, leverage in a system where information was the most valuable currency. Isaiah walked down the courthouse steps into Memphis sunlight and felt the clock ticking. 2 weeks. Okafor had asked for 2 weeks. The evidence was almost complete. The criminal referral for Coulter was one documented incident from meeting the threshold. The consent decree package was ready to file. The investigation was 14 months old and 20 yards from the finish line. But Gentry had the notebook, and the notebook was a fuse, short or long, impossible to tell from the outside, but burning, Isaiah got into the Camry, started the engine, drove toward Kerr Avenue, where a patrol car was probably already parked outside Curtis Vega's barber shop, where Doreen Kincaid was probably sitting on her porch, watching the street with the sharp attention of a woman who had seen this pattern before and knew how it ended, where the house at 1412 sat waiting with its sagging porch and its locked garage and its recording equipment that had captured enough evidence to change a precinct, if the man carrying the investigation survived long enough to deliver it. 2 weeks, 14 days, 336 hours. He gripped the steering wheel and drove. 4 days after the pre-trial hearing, at 6:17 a.m. on a Monday, Isaiah opened his front door to retrieve the newspaper he did not subscribe to and found Frank Gentry standing on his porch. No uniform, no partner, no patrol car visible on the street. Just a man in a gray windbreaker and khaki pants standing 3 feet from the threshold with both hands in plain view, the posture of someone who wanted to communicate that this visit was not official, not sanctioned, and not safe for either of them. The morning was cool. Kerr Avenue was quiet, the hour between night shift workers arriving home and day shift workers leaving. Doreen Kincaid's porch was empty. Her camera, mounted at the roofline, was recording. "I'm not wearing a wire," Gentry said. First words. No greeting. No preamble. The statement of a man who understood that trust was the first currency required and that offering it unasked was the only way to begin. Isaiah did not invite him inside. He stood in the doorway with one hand on the frame and studied the lieutenant who had spent the past week sitting in courtroom galleries, holding manila folders and making eye contact that carried the weight of decisions not yet made. "I don't know who you are," Gentry continued, "but I know what that notebook is. I've read every page, badge numbers cataloged by date, stop frequency cross-referenced against demographics, complaint file numbers that match our IA records, numbers that aren't public, numbers that only someone with access to federal databases would know." He paused. "Let the implication land. You're not a consultant. I'm an IT consultant. My lease says so. My business cards say so." "Your business cards say whatever somebody printed on them." Gentry's voice was flat, technical, the voice of a man who built cases for a living and recognized when someone else was doing the same thing. "I'm not here to blow your cover. I'm here because I have information you need, and because I need something in return." Isaiah said nothing. The silence between them stretched for 4 seconds, long enough for the implications to multiply, short enough that the absence of speech communicated willingness to listen. Coulter didn't plant that bag on his own. Gentry looked at the street, then back. "Sheridan authorized it, signed off on the anonymous tip protocol. We have an internal form for that, off the books, not in any system you'd find through a FOIA request. It's called a directed contact initiation. The DCI form for your arrest has Sheridan's signature. I have a copy." The information hit Isaiah's nervous system like ice water. He had assumed Coulter was operating with tacit permission, the unspoken understanding between a sergeant and his captain that certain methods were tolerated as long as they produced results. But a signed form, a documented protocol for manufacturing probable cause. That was not tacit permission. That was institutional conspiracy. That was evidence of a system designed to generate pretextual arrests, and evidence that the system had an author. "Why are you telling me this?" Isaiah kept his voice neutral. The question was necessary. Motivation determined reliability, and reliability determined whether this conversation was an opportunity or a trap. Gentry's jaw worked. The muscles along his cheekbone tightened and released, the physical signature of a man chewing on words before releasing them. "Because I've been writing Coulter's reports for 6 years. Supplementals, addendums, the paperwork that makes bad stops look clean and dirty, searches look justified. I did it because that's the job. Lieutenants write reports, sergeants make arrests, captains sign off, and the system keeps moving. I told myself it was procedure, told myself I was documenting what happened, not deciding whether it should have happened." His voice dropped. Not to a whisper, to the particular register of a man speaking truths he had stored too long. Then I read your notebook, and I recognized the pattern, because I helped build it. The confession, because that's what it was, stripped of legal formality but containing its essential substance, sat between them on the porch like something fragile and dangerous. A man admitting complicity in exchange for the possibility of consequence that fell short of destruction. If I go down with Coulter and Sheridan, I lose everything: pension, career. My daughter's in college, pre-med at University of Tennessee. I can't pay tuition from a federal prison. Gentry met Isaiah's eyes. Whatever he saw there, judgment, calculation, the blank assessment of an investigator evaluating a potential cooperator, he accepted it. I know I'm not the victim here. I know I helped build what you're documenting, but I also know things that would take you another year to find on your own. And I know that a year from now, Coulter will have moved on to someone else, someone who doesn't have whatever backup you have. Isaiah considered. Weighed operational security against evidentiary value. Measured the risk of revealing anything against the risk of losing a cooperating witness who had access to documentation the Bureau could not obtain through surveillance alone. I can't make you any promises, Isaiah said, but I can tell you that the right people will know you came forward voluntarily, and I can tell you that cooperation before charges is treated differently than cooperation after. Gentry nodded. The nod of a man who had known this was the best he could expect and had decided it was enough. The DCI form, Sheridan's signature, and there's more. 3 years of directed contact initiations, names, dates, targets, every fabricated tip that led to a pretextual arrest in Precinct South since Sheridan took command. He reached into his windbreaker and produced a flash drive. Small, black, unremarkable. The kind of device that could hold 3 years of institutional corruption or a family's vacation photos, indistinguishable from the outside. I copied everything last night. The originals are in Sheridan's safe, combination lock, office on the 2nd floor. But the copies are verified against the precinct's internal metadata. They'll hold up. Isaiah took the flash drive. The weight was negligible. The significance was not. Don't come here again, Isaiah said. And don't contact me through any channel connected to the precinct. If you need to communicate, leave a note in the periodicals section of the Memphis Public Library, Poplar Avenue branch, taped inside the cover of the current issue of National Geographic. I'll check every 48 hours. Gentry stared at him. The specificity of the instruction, dead drop protocol, the kind of thing taught at Quantico and practiced in field offices, told Gentry more about who Isaiah was than any credential could have. His expression shifted through recognition, recalculation, and finally something that might have been relief. National Geographic, he repeated. Then he walked off the porch, turned left, and disappeared around the corner of Doreen Kincaid's magnolia tree. No car. He had walked here. Smart. No plate to log, no unit to track. A ghost visit from a man who was deciding to stop being invisible. Isaiah went inside, locked the door, plugged the flash drive into the Bureau's air-gapped terminal, the machine that had no network connection, no wireless capability, no way to transmit data except through physical removal of its encrypted storage drive. The files loaded in 17 seconds. 41 directed contact initiation forms, 41 fabricated tips, 41 pretextual arrests across 3 years, each one authorized by Captain Boyd Sheridan's signature and executed by officers under his command. 38 of the 41 targets were black men. 2 were black women. 1 was a Latino teenager who had been charged with trespassing in a park that was open to the public. Isaiah read the first 5 entries, then the 10th, then the 23rd. The language was consistent, bureaucratic, sanitized, the prose of institutional violence dressed in the vocabulary of procedure. Directed contact initiation, purpose, community safety. Target description, black male, approximately age, residing at address. Probable cause basis, anonymous tip regarding suspicious activity. Authorizing officer, Captain B. Sheridan, badge 0098. 41 times. The same form, the same fiction, the same signature. Isaiah closed the files, encrypted the drive, sat in the dark spare bedroom and felt something he had not allowed himself to feel in 14 months of professional detachment. Anger. Not the anger of personal grievance, though he had earned that too. The anger of a man who had just seen the blueprint of a machine designed to grind people down, filed neatly in a captain's safe, authorized with the casual penmanship of a man who signed forms the way other people signed checks. He picked up the encrypted phone, called Okafor. "I have a cooperator," he said, "and I have the evidence we need. If you're invested in seeing how this unfolds, tap that subscribe button now. The reveal you've been waiting for is closer than you think." The next 9 days passed in the particular tension of a countdown that only one side knew was happening. Isaiah maintained his routine. Porch coffee, client meetings, corner store trips, the visible rhythms of a life that was simultaneously ordinary and performative. Coulter's patrol car continued its circuits of Kerr Avenue. The barbershop visits continued. The pressure continued. On the 5th day, the pressure became physical again. Isaiah was returning from the corner store at 7:40 p.m., later than usual, the October light already draining from the sky, when Coulter's unmarked personal vehicle pulled alongside him on the sidewalk. Not the patrol car. A black Dodge Charger with tinted windows and no department markings. The distinction mattered. An officer in a personal vehicle was not on duty, was not recording, was not operating under the procedural constraints that body cameras and dispatch logs imposed on official encounters. The window rolled down. Coulter leaned across the passenger seat. He was wearing a polo shirt and jeans. Off duty, off the record. "Hey, Isaiah." The familiarity again. First name, the intimacy of a predator who knows his territory. "Walk and talk?" Isaiah did not stop walking. "I've been instructed by the court to have no contact with you, Sergeant." "That order applies to my official capacity. I'm off duty." Coulter opened the passenger door. Not an invitation, an obstruction. The door swung into Isaiah's path, forcing him to stop or walk into it. He stopped. The grocery bag hung from his left hand. His right hand was empty, visible at his side. Coulter got out of the car, walked around the front. They were alone on the sidewalk, the stretch of South 3rd between Kerr Avenue and the corner store, a block of chain-link fences and houses with curtains drawn against the evening. "You know what bothers me?" Coulter stood 3 feet away, close enough for conversation, close enough for something else. "The video. Your lawyer played that video in court and I saw something that didn't make sense. That footage was shot from an angle that only covers about 30 feet of the street. Somebody positioned that camera to capture exactly what happened at exactly the right time. That's not a coincidence. That's planning." Isaiah said nothing. "Which means somebody told you where the cameras were. Somebody in the neighborhood is working with you, helping you build whatever case you think you're building." Coulter took a step closer, 2 feet now. "I want a name." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you don't." Coulter's hand came up, not to his weapon, not to his belt, but to Isaiah's chest, palm flat, the same placement as the grocery store parking lot, the heel of his hand against Isaiah's sternum, fingers spread, the physical grammar of a man who communicated through contact and expected compliance to follow. But this time Isaiah did not step back. He stood with the grocery bag in his left hand and Coulter's palm on his chest, and looked directly into the sergeant's eyes and said 6 words. "Take your hand off me, Wade." First name. The symmetry was deliberate. The same forced intimacy Coulter had been using for 6 weeks returned in a tone that carried no fear, no deference, and no recognition of the authority that Coulter believed his size and his badge and his history entitled him to. The shift was visible. Something in Coulter's face recalculated. The same recalculation Isaiah had seen during the notebook incident, during the porch confrontation, during every encounter where the expected response of submission had been replaced by a composure that did not fit Coulter's model of how this interaction was supposed to go. Coulter's fingers curled. For 2 seconds. 2 seconds that Isaiah's training measured and his recording device captured. The hand on his chest became a fist holding fabric. The polo shirt bunched in Coulter's grip. Isaiah felt himself pulled forward half an inch, his center of gravity shifting toward a man who was deciding, in real time, whether to cross the line between intimidation and assault. Then the grip released. Coulter stepped back. Something in his expression, not fear, not yet, but the precursor of it, the first chemical signal of a man whose certainty had developed a crack, flickered and was suppressed. "Thursday," Coulter said. The word landed like a threat and a countdown simultaneously. "I'll see you in court on Thursday, and when your little video gets thrown out and your public defender runs out of tricks, we'll finish this conversation, without lawyers." He returned to the charger. The door slammed. The tinted windows revealed nothing. The engine growled and the car pulled away, taillights shrinking down South 3rd until they turned a corner and disappeared. Isaiah stood on the sidewalk holding a grocery bag and breathing with the deliberate rhythm of a man whose body wanted to shake and whose discipline would not allow it. The recording device had captured everything: the off-duty contact, the chest grab, the fabric pull, the threat. Every second of it now existed as federal evidence with a chain of custody number and a timestamp. He walked home, filed the upload, called Okafor. "He grabbed me again. Off-duty. Personal vehicle. No camera." His voice was steady, but the edges were thin. "He's escalating outside the official framework now. The procedural guardrails aren't holding him. Are you safe tonight?" "Safe enough. The hearing is in 3 days. If I can make it to Thursday..." "You'll make it to Thursday. I'm moving the field office agents to active proximity. They'll be within 4 minutes of your location around the clock until the hearing. You won't see them, but they'll be there." A pause. "Isaiah, this is the last contact. After Thursday, the cover drops and you're out. Whatever happens in that courtroom, you're done in the field on this one." He agreed. Set the phone down, sat in the kitchen of 1412 Kerr Avenue, and listened to the house settle around him. The creak of old wood, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of a television from Doreen's side of the fence. The sounds of a neighborhood at night. The sounds of home, or something close enough to home that the difference did not matter in the dark. 3 days. 72 hours. And then the man who thought his target was nobody would learn, in a courtroom and on the record, exactly how wrong he was. But underneath the surface, the case had shifted. The DCI forms transformed the investigation from a pattern or practice complaint into a criminal conspiracy case. Sheridan was no longer a passive enabler. He was an architect, and architects in federal prosecution drew longer sentences than laborers. Okafor moved fast. Within 48 hours of receiving the flash drive's contents, she had briefed the Assistant United States Attorney for the Western District of Tennessee, a prosecutor named Constance Weir, who had built her career on civil rights cases and who received the DCI forms with the controlled intensity of someone who recognized career-defining evidence when it landed on her desk. The timeline accelerated. The original plan, 2 more weeks of field documentation followed by a coordinated filing of the consent decree and individual criminal referrals, was compressed into 10 days. The preliminary hearing on Isaiah's drug possession charges was scheduled for the following Thursday. That hearing would become the stage for the reveal, not by design, but by necessity. The cover was eroding. Gentry's cooperation had introduced a variable that could not be controlled. If Gentry's absence from the precinct's informal power structure was noticed, if Coulter sensed the shift, if Sheridan checked his safe, the investigation would be compromised before the evidence could be formally presented. The reveal had to happen in a courtroom, under oath, on the record, where the procedural protections of judicial proceedings would prevent the kind of evidence destruction that happened in precinct hallways and parking lots. And it had to happen at the moment of maximum evidentiary impact, when Coulter was on the stand, under oath, committed to a narrative that could not be retracted. 3 days before the hearing, Isaiah drove to Curtis Vega's barbershop. It was a Tuesday afternoon. The patrol car was not parked outside, the first time in 12 days. Curtis was alone, sweeping hair from the floor of a shop that had once held 4 busy chairs and now held mostly silence. "It's time," Isaiah said. Curtis stopped sweeping, leaned the broom against the chair, looked at Isaiah with an expression that held everything: exhaustion, skepticism, the fragile architecture of a hope that had been disappointed too many times to stand without support. "Time for what?" "The video. The one your camera caught the night they arrested me. I need you to provide it to my attorney. There's going to be a hearing on Thursday. The video will be submitted as evidence in a motion to suppress." "And then what? They suppress the evidence, drop the charges, and Coulter's back on the street next week doing the same thing to someone else?" Curtis's voice carried the weight of DeWitt Palmer and every other name that had passed through this shop and then out of the neighborhood. "That's not time, Isaiah. That's a cycle." "Not this time." Isaiah chose his words with the care of a man placing stones on a scale. "What's coming is bigger than a suppression motion, bigger than my charges. I can't tell you exactly what, not yet. But I need you to trust me one more time, and I need you to know that everything you wrote down, every date, every lost customer, every dollar, it's going to matter. Not in the way you've been promised before, in a way you can see, in a way that has teeth." Curtis studied him. The barbershop was quiet. The striped pole outside turned in its endless rotation, the mechanical persistence of a business that survived because its owner refused to close. "Thursday," Curtis said. "I'll have it to your lawyer by Wednesday night." He picked up the broom and resumed sweeping. Isaiah left without another word. The transaction was complete. Trust exchanged for a promise that would either be kept or broken, with nothing in between. Wednesday evening, 7:42 p.m. Isaiah was reviewing case notes in the spare bedroom when the encrypted phone buzzed with a message from Okafor. "A USA Weir confirmed. Federal team in position Thursday a.m. Extraction ready if needed. Credentials sealed and in Adler's possession. Proceed as planned." He read the message twice, deleted it, sat in the chair, and looked at the wall of a rented house in a neighborhood that had become, over 6 weeks, something more than a cover assignment. The magnolia next door was visible through the window, Doreen's tree, the one that shaded both properties, the one she had planted with her husband 40 years ago. The porch where she sat and watched the street with eyes that missed nothing and forgave less. A truck passed on South 3rd, its headlights sweeping the bedroom ceiling. Then silence returned. Memphis at night. The city settling into itself the way old houses settle, creaking, shifting, adjusting to weight that accumulates slowly and is noticed only when something gives. He opened the personal notebook, not the evidence one, that was sitting in a federal evidence locker, confiscated and bagged and stamped with a case number, the private one, the one without legal citations. He wrote a single entry. "Last night. Whatever happens tomorrow, I stayed. I didn't leave. The people on this street watched me get stopped and searched and arrested and pressed against a car. They watched and they didn't look away. That has to count for something even if the system doesn't know how to count it." He closed the notebook, set it on the desk beside a cup of cold coffee. Thought about Curtis Vega standing behind his chair while the revenue dropped, writing down lost customers in the back of an appointment book because a man with wire-rimmed glasses told him paper outlasts power. Thought about Doreen adjusting her camera angle because 31 years of watching had taught her that watching was the only authority she had. Thought about Glenn Overby, a retired mail carrier who delivered letters for 40 years and now found himself caught between a tenant he respected and a system he could not afford to defy. Thought about the 41 names on the DCI forms. 41 people who had been targeted the way Isaiah was targeted, stopped, searched, arrested on fabricated tips, their lives disrupted by a system that processed them as problems to be managed rather than citizens to be served. DeWitt Palmer, the 5th-grade teacher, and 39 others whose names Isaiah had memorized because someone should remember them, even if the system that generated them preferred to forget. Tomorrow, the cover would end. Isaiah Beckett, IT consultant, would cease to exist. And the man who emerged from behind that name would carry the weight of everything that name had experienced, every stop, every search, every night in a holding cell, every second of a sergeant's palm pressed against his chest, into a courtroom where those experiences would be transformed from personal suffering into public evidence. He did not sleep. He sat in the chair until dawn broke over Memphis, watching the magnolia's shadow shorten as the sun climbed, and thought about what it meant to be a man who had chosen to become a target in order to prove that targeting existed. Thursday, 9:55 a.m. Courtroom 4. B. Judge Lorraine Fitch presiding. The courtroom was fuller than the last hearing. Curtis Vega sat in the third row, wearing a pressed shirt and a tie Isaiah had never seen him wear. The clothing of a man who understood that courtrooms demanded a uniform of their own. Doreen Kincaid sat 2 rows behind him, her posture rigid, her purse clutched in both hands like a weapon she had not yet decided to deploy. 3 other neighborhood residents were scattered through the gallery, faces Isaiah recognized from porch observations, people who had watched the patrol cars circle Kerr Avenue and had said nothing until Curtis, going door to door the previous evening, had asked them to come. In the back row, 2 men in dark suits sat with the particular stillness of people who were present in an official capacity but had not yet announced themselves. FBI special agents from the Memphis field office. Their credentials were in their jacket pockets. Their instructions were to observe until signaled. Gentry was absent. His absence was by design. Okafor had instructed him to call in sick, to remove himself from the precinct for the day, to be nowhere near the courtroom when the evidence he had provided was introduced. His cooperation would be revealed later in sealed proceedings, where the terms of his agreement with the AUSA would be documented without the audience that public hearings required. ADA Ainsley sat at the prosecution table reviewing notes with the efficiency of a woman who expected this hearing to be routine. She had filed a response to Adler's suppression motion that relied on the same arguments from the previous hearing: the anonymous tip, the officer's prior knowledge, the totality of circumstances. The response was competent. It was also about to become irrelevant. Isaiah sat at the defense table in a clean shirt and the same wire-rimmed glasses he had worn for 6 weeks. Adler sat beside him with a briefcase that contained, in addition to the standard case file, a sealed federal envelope that he had received from a courier at 7:30 that morning. The envelope bore no return address. Inside were 3 items: an FBI credential wallet with Isaiah's photograph and badge number, a letter from the DOJ's Civil Rights Division signed by the Assistant Attorney General, and a 4-page summary of the investigation authorized under 34 U.S.C. Section 12,601. Adler had not opened the envelope. He had been told not to, not until the moment arrived. He sat at the table with the expression of a man who understood that he was holding something significant and who trusted the process enough to wait without knowing the contents. "All rise." The bailiff's voice. Judge Fitch entered, settled into her chair, adjusted her reading glasses. The courtroom sat. "We're here on the matter of State of Tennessee versus Isaiah Beckett. Case number 2-026-CR-04418. Defense has filed a motion to suppress physical evidence. Mr. Adler, you may proceed." Adler stood. "Your Honor, the defense has new evidence to present in support of the suppression motion. We request permission to play a video recording that was not available at the previous hearing." Ainsley objected. Chain of custody, authentication, late disclosure. The objections were procedurally valid. Defense had produced the video only the previous evening, giving prosecution less than 24 hours to review it. Judge Fitch considered. "I'll allow it provisionally. The court will evaluate authenticity and chain of custody during testimony. If foundation is insufficient, I'll strike it. Proceed, Mr. Adler." The video played on the courtroom's monitor. Consumer-grade security footage time-stamped, showing a slice of Kerr Avenue on the night of the arrest. The angle was oblique but sufficient. The resolution was grainy but clear enough. Clear enough to show Officer Trina Hale's right hand reaching toward the wheel well of the Camry. clear enough to show the motion of placement, a hand moving toward the vehicle and then away, 3 seconds before Sergeant Coulter's voice called out the discovery. Clear enough to show that the substance found in Isaiah's trunk had not been found at all. It had been put there. The courtroom went silent, the particular silence of a room full of people processing information that rearranges what they thought they knew. Curtis Vega sat in the third row with his jaw set and his eyes fixed on the screen. Doreen Kincaid's grip on her purse tightened. Ainsley requested a recess. Judge Fitch denied it. "We'll address this in testimony. The state may call its witnesses." Ainsley called Hale first. The direct examination was strained. Hale repeated her previous testimony, but her voice had thinned. She described the search without looking at the monitor where the video had frozen on a frame showing her gloved hand 2 inches from the wheel well. Adler's cross was surgical. "Officer Hale, in the video we just watched, your right hand appears to make contact with the rear wheel well of Mr. Beckett's vehicle approximately 3 seconds before Sergeant Coulter announced the discovery of the controlled substance. Can you explain what your hand was doing?" I was conducting a visual and tactile inspection of the exterior as part of the vehicle search." A tactile inspection of the wheel well during a search for packages described in an anonymous tip. "Is it standard procedure to inspect wheel wells during a package search?" "We check everywhere, including locations where small items, say a plastic bag containing a controlled substance, might be placed by someone who wanted it to be found." "Objection." Ainsley's voice was sharp. "Counsel is characterizing the witness's actions." "Sustained. Rephrase, Mr. Adler." "Officer Hale, were you carrying any items in your right hand during the approach to Mr. Beckett's vehicle?" "No." The word came too fast. "Rehearsed." "The video appears to show your hand in a closed fist position during the approach and an open palm position after contact with the wheel well. Can you explain that discrepancy?" Hale looked at Ainsley. Ainsley did not look back. The alliance between prosecutor and witness was cracking along fault lines that the video had exposed. "I may have been adjusting my glove." "Adjusting your glove while reaching into a wheel well, 3 seconds before the discovery of evidence that formed the sole basis for my client's arrest." Adler let the sequence of facts hang in the courtroom air. No further questions. Judge Fitch made notes. Her expression revealed nothing. 30 years on the bench had trained her face the way Quantico had trained Isaiah's. But her pen moved with a speed that suggested she was documenting more than routine observations. Ainsley called her second witness. "The state calls Sergeant Wade Coulter." Coulter took the stand the way a man takes a stage he has owned for years, settling into the witness chair with the physical ease of someone who considers courtroom testimony a performance he has mastered. He adjusted the microphone, squared his shoulders, faced the gallery with the confidence of a man who had never been contradicted by a verdict and did not expect today to be the first time. Ainsley's direct examination followed the established script: the anonymous tip, the traffic stop, the probable cause determination, the search. Coulter told the story the way he had told it before, with the embellishments of a natural narrator who understood that juries and judges responded to confidence more than evidence. Then Ainsley made a mistake. She asked an open-ended question, the kind that trial advocacy courses teach prosecutors to avoid because it surrenders control of the narrative to the witness. "Sergeant Coulter, based on your experience, did anything about Mr. Beckett's behavior during your encounters suggest that he posed a threat to community safety?" Coulter leaned forward. The question was an invitation, and he accepted it with the enthusiasm of a man who had been waiting to say what he was about to say. "Mr. Beckett is not your typical resident. From the first week he showed up on Kerr Avenue, something was off. He watches. He writes things down. Everything. Every patrol car, every officer, every time we drive past. He carries this little notebook everywhere." Coulter gestured with his hand, indicating the size. "It's full of badge numbers, shift schedules, stop counts. Not the kind of thing a normal person keeps track of. It's the kind of thing someone doing surveillance keeps track of." He paused. turned to face the defense table where Isaiah sat motionless. My officers were concerned. I was concerned. A man shows up with no family, no verifiable employment that we can confirm, no ties to the community, and he starts documenting our operations like he's building a case against us? Coulter shook his head, the theatrical disappointment of a man who wanted the courtroom to share his incredulity. I told Officer Hale after the second stop. I said, "Watch this guy. He's thorough. He's organized. He keeps records like a professional. If I didn't know better, I'd say he thinks he's FBI." The laugh came from somewhere in the gallery, small, nervous, the kind of laugh that fills silence when no one knows what else to do. Coulter smiled, not broadly, just enough to acknowledge that the line had landed, that the absurdity of a man on Kerr Avenue being a federal agent was self-evident. "But he's not FBI," Coulter continued, settling back in the chair. "He's a man who moved into my patrol zone with equipment and habits that don't match his story. And when we searched his vehicle pursuant to a lawful probable cause determination, we found narcotics, which is what I expected to find, because people who don't want to be looked at usually have a reason." The testimony ended. Ainsley returned to her table. Adler stood for cross-examination. "Sergeant Coulter, you just testified that Mr. Beckett's documentation habits were, in your words, like a professional. What kind of professional did you mean?" "I meant he was organized, unusually organized for someone who claims to be an IT consultant." "You also said, and I'm quoting the record, he thinks he's FBI. You said that to Officer Hale, in those words." Coulter's smile returned. "It was a joke. I say a lot of things to lighten the mood on patrol. You pull someone over at 10 at night, and he hands you a notebook full of badge numbers. You make a comment. It's human nature." "It's human nature." Adler repeated the words without inflection. Then he turned toward Judge Fitch. "Your Honor, the defense requests a sidebar." Judge Fitch studied Adler, studied Isaiah. Something in her expression shifted, the microscopic recalibration of a judge who senses that the proceedings are about to leave the territory she had anticipated and enter ground she has not mapped. "Approach." Adler walked to the bench. Ainsley followed. The sidebar was conducted in low voices, but the physical evidence Adler presented was visible to anyone watching closely enough. A sealed federal envelope, opened now for the first time, its contents spread across the bench in the narrow space between the judge's water glass and her gavel. An FBI credential wallet. A photograph matching the man at the defense table. A letter bearing the seal of the United States Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division. A 4-page investigation summary listing case number, authorization statute, target precinct, and the name of the embedded agent, Special Agent Isaiah T. Beckett. Judge Fitch read the letter. "Read it again." Her reading glasses slid down her nose. She pushed them back. The gesture was small, the kind of unconscious movement that betrayed the magnitude of what she was processing. She looked at Ainsley, whose face had gone the particular shade of white that accompanies the realization that the ground you are standing on has been removed. "Your Honor," Ainsley's voice was barely audible at the sidebar, "I was not informed. The state was not informed." "No." Judge Fitch's voice was quiet but carried the particular authority of a jurist who understood that the next words she spoke would determine how this moment was remembered. "No, you were not." She looked past the sidebar toward the defense table where Isaiah sat with his hands folded the way they had been folded through every traffic stop, every search, every night in a holding cell. Then she straightened. "This court will take a 30-minute recess." Her gavel struck once. The sound was louder than the courtroom expected, sharper than the moment seemed to require. It was the sound of a door opening onto a room no one in the gallery had known existed. "All parties and counsel will remain available. Sergeant Coulter, you are not excused. Remain in the building." She stood. The courtroom stood. And in the particular silence that followed, the silence of a room full of people who knew something enormous had just happened but did not yet know what, Isaiah Beckett sat at the defense table and breathed. The man who had just been mocked as someone who thought he was FBI had not reacted, had not flinched, had not allowed the satisfaction of vindication to register on a face that had spent 14 months learning to show nothing, but his hands, folded on the defense table where no one could see them, were shaking. You're not going to want to miss how this ends. If you haven't already, hit subscribe and the notification bell. Justice is about to be served. The 30-minute recess lasted 47 minutes. During that time, the two men in dark suits in the back row made phone calls. Ainsley made phone calls. Adler sat at the defense table and stared at the credential wallet he had just shown a judge and tried to reconcile the client he had been representing with the federal agent that client turned out to be. And Coulter, Sergeant Wade Coulter, 17 unsustained complaints, 6 years of fabricated tips and pretextual stops, and a career built on the institutional permission to treat certain citizens as problems to be managed rather than people to be served, sat in a witness room with a bailiff outside the door, and the first genuine fear he had felt since joining the force. He did not know what had happened at the sidebar. He did not know about the credentials or the letter or the 4-page investigation summary, but he knew silence. He knew the quality of silence that filled a courtroom when something had gone catastrophically wrong, and he knew that the judge's instruction to remain in the building was not a courtesy. When court reconvened, the gallery had changed. The two men in dark suits had moved from the back row to the front. A third person had joined them, a woman in her 40s, dark hair, gray blazer, carrying a leather portfolio that bore the seal of the United States Attorney's Office. Constance Weir. She took a seat behind the prosecution table and said nothing. Her presence said everything. Judge Fitch entered. The room stood. The room sat. The judge adjusted her glasses and spoke with the deliberate precision of someone reading words she had composed during the recess and revised until they carried exactly the weight she intended. This court has been presented with evidence during a sidebar conference that materially alters the nature of these proceedings. The court has verified the authenticity of the evidence through direct communication with the United States Attorney's Office for the Western District of Tennessee and the FBI's Memphis field office. She paused. Let the institutional names settle into the room. The defendant in this case, Isaiah Beckett, is a special agent of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, assigned to the Civil Rights Division. He has been conducting an authorized investigation under 34 U.S.C. Section 12601 into the pattern and practice of policing at Memphis Police Department, Precinct South. This investigation has been ongoing for approximately 14 months. The courtroom did not gasp. It went still. The kind of stillness that precedes the reconfiguration of everything. Relationships, assumptions, power structures, the fundamental understanding of who is who and what is what. Curtis Vega's hands gripped the armrests of his gallery chair. Doreen Kincaid closed her eyes. Not in defeat. In something closer to relief. The exhale of a woman who had watched her neighborhood endure institutional abuse for 31 years and was hearing, for the first time, the language of accountability spoken in a room where it might actually mean something. The charges against Agent Beckett are hereby dismissed with prejudice. Judge Fitch's pen struck the order. The evidence upon which those charges were based, a controlled substance allegedly found in the defendant's vehicle, is referred to the FBI and the United States Attorney for investigation as potential evidence of fabrication and obstruction of justice. She looked at Ainsley. Ms. Ainsley, the court directs you to preserve all records, communications, and files related to this prosecution. Any destruction or alteration of evidence from this point forward will be treated as contempt and referred for potential criminal charges. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor. Ainsley's voice was small, the voice of a woman watching the architecture of her career develop cracks she could not repair. Sergeant Coulter. Judge Fitch turned to the witness room door, which the bailiff had opened at her instruction. Coulter stood in the doorway. His face was the face of a man who has heard his name spoken in a tone he has never heard before, the tone of a judge who is no longer addressing a witness but a subject. You are not under arrest, but you are hereby ordered to surrender your service weapon to the bailiff before leaving this building. You are further ordered to make no contact with any witness, complainant, or subject of the federal investigation referenced in these proceedings. Violation of this order will result in immediate detention. Do you understand?" Coulter's hand moved to his belt. Reflexive, the instinct of a man whose weapon had been an extension of his authority for 15 years. Then the hand stopped, dropped. He unholstered the weapon, cleared the chamber with mechanical precision, and handed it to the bailiff. The transfer took 4 seconds. In those 4 seconds, the gallery watched a sergeant become a suspect. The transformation was not dramatic. It was procedural, bureaucratic, the institutional machinery of accountability operating the same way the institutional machinery of abuse had operated, with forms and orders and the quiet violence of process. Coulter turned from the bailiff, and his gaze found Isaiah. The distance between them, 20 feet of courtroom floor, a gallery railing, the invisible architecture of due process, might as well have been inches. Isaiah saw the recognition arrive. Not the shock of the sidebar, which Coulter had experienced secondhand through the changed atmosphere. This was the full weight of understanding. The notebook, the patience, the composure under searches and stops, and an arrest and a sergeant's palm on his chest, all of it clicking into focus. The man he had mocked as a jailhouse lawyer. The man he had told his partner was someone who thought he was FBI. The man whose notebook he had dropped on the asphalt, and whose head he had knocked against a car door frame. That man was FBI. Had always been FBI. Every stop, every search, every fabricated tip and planted baggie and parking lot chest press, all of it documented by a federal agent wearing wire-rimmed glasses and a $10 polo shirt. Coulter's jaw worked, his fists clenched and released at his sides. For a moment the bailiff watched carefully, and the 2 FBI agents in the front row tracked with their hands near their jackets. It seemed like Coulter might move, might cross the 20 feet, might do the thing his body wanted to do when his mind finally caught up with what had happened. He did not. 6 years of training in the art of control, the same control he had weaponized against citizens on dark streets, held him in place. He turned and walked through the witness room door. His footsteps echoed in the hallway. Heavy, deliberate, getting quieter, then gone. This court is in recess. The gavel fell. The sound echoed. Isaiah stood from the defense table. Adler stood beside him, still processing, still reconciling. The 2 FBI agents approached from the front row, flanking Isaiah with the practiced choreography of a security detail that had been briefed on exactly this scenario. One of them spoke quietly. "Agent Beckett, a USA Weir would like to speak with you before we proceed to the field office." Isaiah nodded. He turned to walk toward the conference room adjacent to the courtroom, the room where in 3 hours the formal debriefing would begin that would translate 14 months of embedded investigation into the legal instruments of federal enforcement. But before he reached the door, he stopped, turned toward the gallery, found Curtis Vega's face in the 3rd row. Curtis was sitting very still. The tie he had worn, the tie that represented a courtroom he had trusted to fail him, was slightly loosened. His eyes were wet, not crying, not the collapse of emotion that television demands from moments like this. Just the quiet moisture of a man who has been carrying weight he did not know how to set down and has just felt the first ounce lift. Isaiah met his eyes, held the contact for 2 seconds. Then he nodded, once, and walked through the conference room door. It was not much. A nod. 2 seconds. But it was the keeping of a promise. "I won't leave until it's finished." And it was not finished yet. The debriefing with AUSA Weir lasted 4 hours. Isaiah provided a comprehensive account of his 14 months in the field, chronological, detailed, cross-referenced against the recording uploads, the notebook entries, and the DCI forms provided by Gentry. Weir listened with the focused intensity of a prosecutor who understood that the evidence sitting on the conference table was sufficient to reshape the relationship between a police precinct and the community it served. The conversation that followed was strategic rather than evidentiary. Here's where we are. Weir spread documents across the table, a visual map of the case's architecture. We have enough for the consent decree, 14 months of pattern documentation, over 70 pretextual stops, the DCY forms showing systematic fabrication of probable cause, community impact testimony, and your personal experience as a controlled test case. The DOJ will file the pattern or practice complaint within the week. The consent decree negotiation will follow. Standard timeline is 3 to 6 months. And individual charges? Isaiah asked. Coulter is the strongest case. 18 U.S.C. Section 242. Deprivation of rights under color of law. The chest press incident, the fabricated arrest, the planted evidence. We have recordings, video, and your testimony as a trained federal agent. Grand jury presentation within 60 days. She paused. The maximum sentence is 10 years if we can prove the violation involved bodily injury. The chest press may or may not qualify. Case law is split. More likely we're looking at 1 to 3 years if convicted. Hale? Fabrication of evidence. Tennessee Code Section 39-16-503, tampering with evidence. Also potentially 18 U.S.C. Section 242 if we can establish that the planting was racially motivated, which your case demographics strongly support. Her attorney will push for a plea. Will offer cooperation in exchange for testimony against Coulter. Sheridan? The DCI forms are devastating. 41 authorized fabricated tips across 3 years. That's not a pattern, it's a program. We're looking at conspiracy charges under 18 U.S.C. Section 241, conspiracy against rights. Multiple counts. The challenge is proving he knew the tips were fabricated rather than simply authorizing a protocol he believed was legitimate. Weir's expression conveyed the particular frustration of a prosecutor who understood that the gap between moral certainty and evidentiary proof was the space where institutional defendants lived. His attorney will argue he trusted his officer's representations. It's a credible defense, even if we know it's fiction. And Gentry? Gentry cooperated before charges. That matters. Under the DOJ's cooperation guidelines, voluntary pre-charge cooperation with substantial evidentiary contribution results in non-prosecution or reduced charges at the AUSA's discretion. My recommendation is administrative discipline only, demotion, mandatory retraining, and assignment outside patrol functions. No criminal charges. She met Isaiah's eyes. He built the reports that made bad arrests look clean. That's complicity. But it's also how we got the DCI forms. And without the DCI forms, Sheridan walks. Isaiah accepted the calculus. Justice was not mathematics. It did not produce clean equations. It was negotiation, compromise, the imperfect distribution of consequences across a system that had designed itself to resist them. Gentry would escape criminal liability because his cooperation was more valuable than his punishment. That was not justice, it was strategy. And strategy, in civil rights enforcement, was the difference between changing a precinct and changing a headline. Ainsley, Isaiah said, the prosecutor who filed charges she never independently verified. State Bar Ethics Referral. Will file the complaint citing failure to exercise independent judgment in evaluating officer testimony. The evidence is strong. She relied entirely on police narratives in case after case without conducting independent investigation. But ethics proceedings take 18 months to 2 years, and the most likely outcome is a public reprimand rather than disbarment. Weir's voice carried the weight of experience. Prosecutors are rarely held accountable for trusting police too much. The system is designed to make that trust the default. The meeting concluded at 3:45 p.m. Isaiah walked out of the courthouse into Memphis afternoon heat. The city moved around him. Traffic, pedestrians, the ordinary mechanics of a Thursday that was ordinary for everyone except the people whose lives had just been rearranged by events that had taken place behind courtroom doors. He drove to Kerr Avenue, parked in the driveway, sat in the car for a long moment, looking at the house he had lived in for 6 weeks and that he would not need to live in much longer. The porch he had sat on every morning. The fence where Doreen had stood with cornbread and warnings. The street where he had been stopped 5 times, searched 3 times, arrested once, and pressed against a car by a man who believed that the badge and the body it was pinned to were the same thing. Doreen appeared at the fence. She had changed from her courtroom clothes back into a housecoat. Her expression was different from the one he had seen in the gallery. The relief had settled into something more complex. Not happiness, not satisfaction, something in between that did not have a word because the situation it described, partial justice arriving years late to a neighborhood that had been waiting decades, did not fit neatly into the language of resolution. FBI, she said. One word, flat. Testing the sound of it against the man she had been feeding cornbread and sharing warnings with for the past 6 weeks. Yes, ma'am. She nodded slowly. Processing. I've been telling people about Coulter for 6 years. 6 years of phone calls, complaint forms, council meetings. Nobody listened. Nobody came. She looked at him. Not with the assessment she had used when evaluating the new neighbor, but with something rawer. Why did it take this? Why did it take a federal agent living on my street and getting arrested before anyone with power cared enough to look? Isaiah did not have a good answer. The honest answer, because systems protect themselves until the cost of protection exceeds the cost of reform, and that cost is measured in political capital rather than human suffering, was true, but not comforting. So he said the only thing that was both honest and worth saying. I don't know, Doreen. I know it shouldn't have. She held his gaze for 3 more seconds. Then she turned back toward her porch. You want coffee? Yes, ma'am, I would. They sat on Doreen's porch and drank coffee as the sun began its descent over South Memphis. Neither spoke much. The magnolia cast a shadow that covered both yards, and for the first time in 6 weeks, no patrol car drove past. The weeks that followed moved at the speed of institutions rather than individuals. The DOJ filed its pattern or practice complaint against the city of Memphis and the Memphis Police Department on a Tuesday, 14 days after the courtroom reveal. The complaint was 47 pages long and cited 112 documented incidents of civil rights violations, pretextual stops, warrantless searches, excessive force, fabricated probable cause, witness intimidation, and economic retaliation against complainants. The complaint named Precinct South specifically, but noted that preliminary evidence suggested similar patterns in at least 2 other precincts. The consent decree negotiations began immediately. The city's legal team, 3 attorneys from an outside firm retained at $400 per hour, pushed back on every provision. The federal monitor's authority was contested. The body camera mandate was challenged on budgetary grounds. The Civilian Review Board's composition was debated for 3 weeks before a compromise was reached that satisfied neither side and would probably satisfy neither community. The consent decree was signed 68 days after the filing. Its provisions included mandatory body cameras for all patrol officers, independent civilian oversight of complaint investigations, quarterly demographic reporting on stops and searches, and a federal monitor appointed for 18 months with authority to recommend corrective action, but not to mandate it. The monitor's budget was approved at 60% of the requested amount. The remaining 40% was subject to future appropriation, the bureaucratic language of promises that might or might not be kept. Sergeant Wade Coulter was suspended without pay on the day of the courtroom reveal. The suspension became indefinite 2 weeks later, when the grand jury in the Western District of Tennessee returned a federal indictment on 3 counts of deprivation of rights under color of law, 18 U.S.C. Section 242. The indictment cited the chest press, the fabricated arrest, and the planted evidence, each count supported by recordings, video, and the testimony of a federal agent. Coulter's attorney entered a not guilty plea. The trial was scheduled for the following spring, 8 months away. Bail was set at $50,000. Coulter posted it through his union's legal defense fund. Officer Trina Hale resigned before she could be suspended. Her resignation letter, 1 paragraph, cited personal reasons. 2 weeks later, the Shelby County District Attorney's Office filed state charges, tampering with evidence under Tennessee Code Section 39-16-503 and official misconduct under Section 39-16-402. Her attorney immediately began negotiating a plea deal that would trade testimony against Coulter for reduced charges. The negotiation was expected to take months. Lieutenant Frank Gentry received administrative discipline, demotion from lieutenant to patrol officer, mandatory retraining, reassignment to a non-patrol administrative role in a different precinct. No criminal charges were filed. His cooperation agreement with the AUSA remained sealed. The demotion would reduce his pension by approximately 14%, a financial consequence that fell short of justice and exceeded punishment, occupying the uncomfortable middle ground where most institutional accountability lived. Captain Boyd Sheridan retained an attorney within hours of the courtroom reveal. His attorney, a former federal prosecutor who specialized in defending law enforcement officers, filed motions to seal the DCI forms, challenge their authentication, and suppress Gentry's cooperation as fruit of an unauthorized disclosure. The motions were denied. The grand jury received the DCI forms along with testimony from Okafor and the AUSA's forensic accountant. The investigation into Sheridan continued, but continued slowly, at the pace of a system that gave every advantage to those it was designed to hold accountable. 6 weeks after the reveal, Sheridan was placed on administrative leave with pay. His union negotiated the terms. The phrase "paid administrative leave" appeared in the local newspaper alongside a quote from the police union president describing the investigation as premature and politically motivated. 3 months later, Sheridan retired. The terms of the retirement were negotiated privately. Full pension, no admission of wrongdoing, a confidential agreement that prohibited him from seeking employment in law enforcement within the state of Tennessee. The agreement did not prohibit him from seeking employment in law enforcement in any other state. The DOJ objected to this provision but lacked the legal authority to override a retirement agreement negotiated under state labor law. Boyd Sheridan left Memphis on a Saturday morning. He drove west. No one tracked where he went. A DA Margot Ainsley received notification of a state bar ethics inquiry 4 weeks after the reveal. The inquiry cited failure to exercise independent prosecutorial judgment, specifically the pattern of accepting police testimony without independent corroboration in cases originating from Precinct South. The inquiry was preliminary. The investigation would take 12 to 18 months. The most likely outcome, based on precedent, was a private reprimand, a consequence that would remain in her professional file but would not be publicly disclosed. Ainsley continued prosecuting cases. Her conviction rate for the quarter remained at 91%. The human consequences moved at a different speed. Curtis Vega's barbershop recovered. The patrol cars stopped parking outside within days of the reveal. Customers returned, slowly at first, then in numbers that exceeded the pre-harassment baseline. The story of Curtis's video had spread through South Memphis with the velocity of news that confirmed what everyone already suspected, but could not prove. People came to get haircuts. They also came to sit in the chairs and talk about what had happened, the stops, the searches, the quiet terror of being monitored by the people who were supposed to protect you. The barbershop became, in the weeks after the reveal, what it had always been underneath the fear. A place where a community processed its experience through conversation and trusted the man with the clippers to listen. Curtis framed a printout of the consent decree's first page and hung it on the wall between the mirror and the jar of peppermints. When customers asked about it, he told them the story. When they asked what it meant, he said what Doreen had taught him without using those words. It means somebody finally listened. Whether they keep listening, that's the next fight. Doreen Kincaid did not frame anything. She adjusted the angle of her porch camera to cover more of the street and replaced the memory card with a higher capacity model. When Isaiah stopped by to thank her for the cornbread, the warnings, the footage that had documented Coulter's notebook drop, she waved the thanks away with a gesture that communicated both acceptance and impatience. I didn't do it for thanks. I did it because someone had to watch, and because nobody with a title was willing to. She fixed him with the look she had used on day 9, the one that contained both hospitality and interrogation. You're going to leave now, back to whatever office they send you to next, and this street is going to be here. Same houses, same people, same everything, except now there's a piece of paper that says things will be different. The consent decree has enforcement provisions. The federal monitor, I've seen monitors before. They come, they write reports, they leave. Then the same people who were here before the monitor are still here after. She was not being cynical. She was being accurate. And Isaiah, who had seen consent decrees succeed, and consent decrees fail, and consent decrees exist in the vast middle ground between those outcomes, could not argue with the accuracy. If the monitor doesn't hold, call me. He wrote a number on a card, not his bureau extension, but a direct line that bypassed the switchboard and the hold queue and the bureaucratic filters that turned citizens into case numbers. Anytime, any hour. If they start again, the stops, the parking, the pressure, you call and I answer. Doreen took the card, studied it, placed it in the pocket of her housecoat, with the care of someone who understood that phone numbers were promises, and promises were the most fragile currency in any neighborhood's economy. I'll hold on to it, she said, and I'll hold you to it. Isaiah filed his final field report on a Friday afternoon, 6 days after the consent decree was signed. The report was 18 pages, clinical, comprehensive, the complete narrative of 14 months compressed into the bureaucratic language that federal databases required. He read it once before submitting. The language was precise. The evidence was cataloged. The outcomes were documented. But the report did not contain everything. It did not contain the sound of his notebook hitting the asphalt on Kerr Avenue. It did not contain the feeling of a palm pressed against his sternum in a grocery store parking lot. It did not contain the 11 seconds of helplessness that had no case number. It did not contain the taste of Doreen's cornbread or the steadiness of Curtis's hands on the clippers, or the particular silence of a neighborhood that had learned to endure what it could not change. Those details lived in the other notebook, the one without dates or badge numbers or legal citations, the one that was just for him. He submitted the report, closed the laptop, began packing the house on Kerr Avenue, the second-hand furniture, the client files, the recording equipment from the locked garage. The process took 2 days. When he was finished, the house looked the way it had when he arrived, empty, waiting, ready for the next tenant who would park in the driveway and wave at the neighbors and wonder why the patrol cars circled the block. On his last morning, he sat on the porch with a cup of coffee and watched the street. The magnolia's shadow covered the yard. A jogger passed. A school bus stopped at the corner. The ordinary rhythms of a neighborhood that would continue long after the federal investigation was archived and the consent decree expired, and the monitor filed his last report. His phone buzzed. A text from Okafor. New assignment. Briefing Monday. Details encrypted and waiting at field office. He read it, deleted it, finished his coffee. Then he locked the front door of 1412 Kerr Avenue, placed the key under the mat for Glenn Overby, and walked to the Camry for the last time. The engine started the way it always did, reliable, unremarkable, the sound of a cover identity that had served its purpose and could now be retired. He pulled out of the driveway, turned onto South 3rd Street, headed toward the highway and whatever came next. In the rearview mirror, Kerr Avenue shrank. Houses, fences, porch lights, the magnolia standing patient above it all. A street that looked the same as it had 6 weeks ago. A street where nothing had changed and everything had changed, and the difference between those two things would take years to measure. 3 months later. The Federal Monitor's first quarterly report was filed with the Western District of Tennessee on a Tuesday. 38 pages. 12 recommendations. 4 findings of noncompliance. The report noted that body camera usage had increased to 87% of patrol shifts, an improvement, but short of the mandated 100%. The Civilian Review Board had convened twice, but had not yet reviewed any complaints, citing procedural development delays. Demographic reporting on stops and searches had been submitted, but contained gaps. 3 weeks of data from Precinct South were listed as Unavailable due to system migration. System migration. The institutional euphemism for data that had been lost, destroyed, or rendered inaccessible through processes that were technically legal and practically obstructive. The Monitor's report concluded with a paragraph that captured, in the measured language of federal oversight, the fundamental tension of reform. Substantial progress has been made in policy development. Implementation remains inconsistent. The department's cooperation with the monitoring process has been adequate in form and incomplete in substance. The Monitor recommends continued oversight and notes that the timeline for achieving sustained compliance will likely extend beyond the current 18-month appointment. Adequate in form, incomplete in substance. The story of institutional reform told in 8 words. Curtis Vega cut hair. Doreen Kincaid watched the street. Glenn Overby rented the house to a new tenant, a young woman who taught at the elementary school on South 3rd and who had been told, by a landlord who now asked questions before signing leases, that the neighborhood was getting better. Getting better. The aspirational tense. The tense of neighborhoods that exist in the space between what they are and what they are promised they will become. On a Saturday morning, 4 months after the reveal, Curtis Vega was cutting a customer's hair when a man walked into the shop. Mid-30s, dark suit, clean-shaven. He did not sit in a chair. He stood near the door and waited until the cut was finished. Then he approached the counter. "Are you Curtis Vega?" "Depends on who's asking." The man produced a card. Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division. "We're compiling community impact statements for the consent decree compliance file. Your barbershop was listed as a site of targeted economic retaliation. We'd like your account, dates, financial losses, customer attrition, and any ongoing concerns about police conduct since the decree was implemented." Curtis looked at the card, then at the wall where the framed consent decree page hung between the mirror and the peppermints, then back at the man. "Sit down," Curtis said, gesturing to the first chair. "This is going to take a while." He talked for 2 hours. The DOJ investigator filled 11 pages of notes. When he left, Curtis stood in the doorway of his shop and watched the man's government sedan pull into traffic. Then he picked up his phone and texted a number he had used only once before. "DOJ came to the shop. They're listening." The reply came 30 seconds later. No name, just 3 words. "Good. Keep watching." Curtis put the phone away, picked up his broom, swept the floor of a barbershop that had survived because its owner refused to close, in a neighborhood that was learning, slowly, imperfectly, with the fragile optimism of people who had been disappointed before, to believe that listening might lead to change. And in a federal evidence locker in the basement of the Robert A. Young Federal Building, a manila folder sat in a box labeled with the investigation's case number. Inside the folder, among 41 directed contact initiation forms and 3 years of fabricated tips and a sergeant's supplemental reports and a lieutenant's cooperation agreement, there was a single document that had never been addressed in the courtroom proceedings or the consent decree negotiations or the AUSA's charging decisions. An email, printed from the precinct's internal server, dated 11 days before Isaiah Beckett moved to Kerr Avenue. Sender. Redacted. The address replaced with a black bar that the FBI's digital forensics team had been unable to recover from the server's deletion log. Subject line, R.E., new resident, Kerr Avenue. The body of the email contained 2 sentences. Freelance IT consultant. Single male. Background check comes back clean. Too clean. Handle before quarterly review. Handle before quarterly review. Someone had known Isaiah was coming. Not his name. The email did not contain it. Not his identity. The email made no reference to the FBI or the DOJ, but someone had known that a new resident on Kerr Avenue would require handling. That his background was suspiciously clean. That the handling needed to happen before the precinct's quarterly performance review, the review that measured arrest numbers, stop counts, and compliance metrics that determined funding and promotions. Someone inside the system, not Coulter, not Sheridan, not Gentry, not Hale, had flagged Isaiah before he arrived. had set the machinery of harassment in motion before the first patrol car circled his block, and that someone's identity remained behind a black bar that no forensic tool had yet been able to penetrate. Isaiah read the email in his new field office, 3 states away, on a Tuesday evening when the rest of the building was empty. He read it 3 times. Then he opened the notebook, the personal one, the one without case numbers, and wrote a single line. "Who sent the email?" He underlined it twice, closed the notebook, placed it in his jacket pocket, and went back to work. Because some investigations end with convictions and consent decrees and the satisfying arithmetic of justice served. And some investigations end with a question, unanswered, unresolved, sitting in the silence between what was proven and what remains unknown. A question that waits, patient, like a man on a porch with a notebook and a cup of coffee, watching a street that has not yet decided what it wants to become, waiting for the answer, however long it takes.
Thank you for taking the time to watch this video today. If you found the content helpful, please remember to like and subscribe so you won't miss our upcoming episodes. If you have any questions or suggestions, feel free to leave a comment below. We are always here to listen.